He died as a traitor and woke up in the body of a ragged boy with calluses on someone else's hands. In his head, 20 years of someone else's life and a pain that tears at his skull. And before his eyes, the trading terminal glows, showing that the dusty weed on the shelf is worth 1,900 times more than they're asking for it. The market was wrong, and he's the only one who noticed. First comes the cold, not winter's, the kind that flows from within, as if his blood had turned 2 degrees colder than it should be. Then the smell hits him. Dry grass, dust, something sour. That's how a place smells when the windows haven't been opened for years. Han Do-yeon opens his eyes wide and sees a dark ceiling with a crack running down the middle. He doesn't recognize this ceiling, doesn't recognize these hands. Skinny fingers, calluses on the palms, dirt under his fingernails. He raises his hand to his face, and the hand obeys, only it isn't his hand. Do-yeon sits up, and his head explodes from the inside, as if someone had poured a stranger's hard drive into his skull, and his brain is unpacking 20 years of someone else's life in 30 seconds. Names, faces, the taste of cheap barley porridge, his mother's warm palms on his forehead, his sister's cough behind the thin wall. His father lies on the bed and doesn't move. His mother cries. His mother counts coins. His mother smiles at customers. His mother cries again. Do-yeon doubles over and vomits right onto the floor. Bile and nothing else. This guy hasn't eaten a proper meal in a long time. He wipes his mouth with the back of his hand and looks around. A cramped room. Shelves along the walls. Bundles of dried herbs. Small stones. Clay jars with faded labels. A counter. Han's herbs and trinkets. The outer circle of the great magic market of Varen. The cheapest corner of the cheapest tier. A place where even rats didn't linger because there was nothing to steal here. And then a voice sounds in his head. Not human, not mechanical. Something in between, as if text on a screen had suddenly become audible. The trading terminal opens. A translucent panel flashes before his eyes. Numbers, graphs, lines of data. Do-yeon blinks. The panel hangs. He blinks again. The panel creeps along with his gaze. He turns his head toward the nearest shelf, and 3 numbers light up above a bundle of dried yarrow. Cost price: 0.3 copper coins. Average across the 7 circles: 14 copper coins. Fair price: 38 silver. Do-yeon freezes. 38 silver for a bundle of herbs sold for 2 copper coins. For 3 years of his past life, he had been searching for exactly such discrepancies. Market inefficiency, an arbitrage window, a margin of 1,900%. And here, in a shabby shop, in a foreign body, in a foreign world, he feels something familiar. Excitement. The very same feeling that came at 4 in the morning when the signal lit up on the Bloomberg terminal, when the market was wrong, when everyone was selling and you saw what you needed to buy. He stands up. His legs are shaking. His body is weak and hungry, but his mind is working perfectly. A door creaks behind him. Do-yeon turns around. Standing in the doorway is a woman of about 45. A thin face, dark circles under her eyes, a cheap wooden hairpin in her hair, hands red from work. She looks at him with anxiety and fatigue and love all at once. Mother. Han Sun-mi. She asks if he's all right. She says he collapsed in the middle of the shop an hour ago. That she wanted to call a doctor, but a doctor costs 2 silver coins, and they don't have 2 silver coins. Do-yeon looks at her and sees what the terminal doesn't show. Gray static instead of data. No numbers, no scales, just his mother. He swallows and replies that everything is fine, that she just felt dizzy from hunger. She nods and goes to the kitchen. Doyeon watches her go and quietly utters a word that doesn't exist in this world. Emma. Mom. The terminal is waiting. He crawls under the counter and finds the ledger. Thick, greasy. His mother's handwriting is neat and sad. Yesterday's income, 1 markad, 4 copper coins. The day before yesterday, 7 copper coins. Rent, 5 markads a week. Tax, 2 markads a month. And below that line, it's not just his blood that runs cold, but everything inside him. Debt, 400 markads. Berk Molt's office, 5% a month. In the old world, they'd lock up a lender for that. Here, they call it a generous offer. Doyeon closes his eyes, and the numbers emerge in the darkness. The terminal works even through his eyelids. He runs through the goods in his mind. Yarrow, a margin of 1,900%. Cracked stones that the market considers broken, but the terminal shows that the cracks are channels for residual mana, and the stone acts as a filter. The price is 4 times the market rate. Silver fern roots, which are used here to stoke furnaces because they burn poorly, but when processed correctly, they yield ink resistant to magical erasure. The Scribes Guild pays a gold piece per vial for it. Doyeon's eyes widen. He sits in a shop crammed with treasures, and the whole market considers it trash. His mother brings a bowl. Liquid barley porridge. No oil, no salt. Doyeon eats slowly. Every spoonful is an investment. His body is his only tool. Without it, the terminal is useless. And then there's a knock at the door. Heavy, confident. That's how someone who knows the door will open knocks. His mother turns pale. Her hands clench the edge of her apron. She knows who's come. The door swings open. A fat man in an expensive coat enters. A round red face, small eyes. Behind him are 2 larger men. Berk Molt, a buyer from the third circle. The terminal registers instantly. Confidence, 92%. Urgency, 78. Hidden stress, 61. Doyeon clings to the third digit. Berk is nervous. Why would a buyer be nervous before visiting a shabby shop? Berk stretches his lips into a greasy smile. He says he's brought good news, that he's been thinking about the Han family's difficult situation, that he's ready to offer a solution. He pulls out a wooden box and sets it on the counter. He opens it. Inside are 40 protective amulets, round, with runes. Berk explains that the batch has a slight defect and doesn't pass the guild's inspection. But it works. He trades the 400 markad debt for this box. The family will sell the amulets for 10 markads apiece and break even. The mother looks at the box, at Berk, at her son. In her eyes flashes that very dangerous hope that drives people to agree to what they shouldn't. Doyeon stands up, takes one amulet, twirls it between his fingers. The terminal explodes with data. Manufacturer, Terran Workshop, batch number 417. Registry status, deleted 3 weeks ago. The box's actual value is 36 markads against a debt of 400. But that's not the point. The point is a single line. Deleted. Batch written off. Officially, it doesn't exist. It's stolen goods. And if the amulets are found during a search of the Khan family's home, it won't be the Terrans or Berk who go to jail. It'll be the Khans. Doyeon puts the amulet back. He looks at Berk. Berk is still smiling. The confidence rating on the terminal drops to 84. Doyeon smiles back, gently, as if he'd been offered tea. He says the offer is excellent, and the family is happy to accept it. But he asks for one small thing: to have everything processed by the guild clerk, with a seal of origin for the goods, today at 3. it's safer that way for both sides. Barak's smile freezes. His eyes narrow. A flush creeps up his neck. His stress level skyrockets to 91. His confidence plummets to 43. Barak mumbles that this is unnecessary, that they are simple people and why do they need paperwork, that he trusts the Han family. Doyon doesn't back down. Certificate of origin, today at 3. We'll be waiting. Barak glances at his mother. His mother is silent. She doesn't understand anything, but she sees that her son is standing straight, speaking calmly and not looking away. And that's enough for her to stay silent, too. Barak grabs the box. He mutters that he'll think about it. He leaves. The door slams. The mother turns to her son and asks why he did that. That Barak will get angry, that you can't quarrel with a creditor. Doyon sits down. He finishes his cold porridge. Then he says that Barak will come back and bring the money. The mother shakes her head. Around noon, the door opens again. Barak, alone. No guards, no smile. He tosses a leather pouch onto the counter. 50 markads for the trouble. He asks her to forget about the box. He asks her not to put his name next to the word amulets. And he leaves, quickly, without looking back. The mother freezes over the pouch. 50 markads. More than that she earns in 2 months. She looks up at her son, and in her eyes there is not joy, but fear. She asks how he knew. Doyon answers simply that he looked closely. His mother doesn't believe him, but the money is real. And for the first time in a long time, she doesn't cry that night. Doyon lies in a cramped room behind a wall next to the shop. Behind the partition, Yuna is coughing. His sister, 14 years old, lung rot. The same disease that took their father to his grave. The terminal displays the cost of treatment. 200 markads for the full course. They've earned 50, plus a debt of 400. Total, 550. Doyon closes his eyes. The terminal glows softly in the darkness, and he begins to count. Doyon woke up before dawn. His body ached. His muscles throbbed as if after a marathon, even though he had simply been lying on a hard straw mattress. The former owner of this body was no athlete. Skinny arms, sunken chest, calluses from the crates, but not an ounce of stamina. Doyon sat up and stretched. Behind the wall, Yuna coughed 3 times, then silence. Then once more. He clenched his jaw and stood up. The terminal came to life instantly. A translucent panel hovered in the air before his eyes. He was already getting used to it, just like you get used to the glasses you wear every day. At first, you notice the frame, and then you see only the world through the lenses. The plan was simple. Doyon had thought it through overnight while listening to his sister's cough. Step 1. Walk through the outer circle and inspect every stall on the 3 nearest streets. Touch everything his hands could reach. The terminal only works with what he's seen and touched, so he had to touch things. Step 2. Find goods with a gap between the outer circle market price and the fair price. A minimum 300% margin, otherwise it's not worth the effort. Step 3. Buy up everything with the money he has. Of the 50 markads, 30 go toward purchases, 10 for a week's rent, 10 for food for the family. Step 4. Resell through the second circle, directly, without middlemen. To do this, you need to find a buyer personally. Doyon knew from the memories of the body's former owner that mid-tier workshops traded in the second circle. Alchemists who need components, enchanters who need stones, herbalists who need raw materials. They bought in bulk from third circle wholesalers. If you offered them the same goods 20% cheaper, they'd take them without a second thought. And Doyon's margin would still remain above 500%. He stepped out of the shop just as the sun was touching the rooftops. The outer circle was waking up slowly. The air smelled of smoke and sourdough. Somewhere, a cart creaked. An old man in a tattered jacket was spreading a blanket of small stones on the ground. A woman with a basket of dried mushrooms was haggling with a deceased cab driver. Two boys were dragging a box containing something jingling. Doyon walked and watched. The terminal ran continuously. Every object in his field of vision was assigned 3 numbers: cost price, market price, fair price. Most goods on the outer ring cost exactly what was asked for them. Cheap junk at the price of cheap junk. But about 1 in 20 stalls gave a flash, a red light on the terminal panel, a discrepancy. Doyon stopped. He touched the goods. The data was updated. He memorized it. The first find appeared on Copper Cauldron Street. An old merchant named Gat was selling a sack of cracked storage stones for a copper coin apiece. 20 stones in the sack, 20 copper coins for the whole sack. The terminal showed it. The cracks weren't damage, but channels of residual mana. Each stone works as a filter for purifying liquid potions. Second circle alchemists buy such filters for 3 silver pieces apiece. The profit margin. Doyon didn't even bother to calculate it. He bought the bag. Gat looked at him with pity. He said the guy was wasting money on junk. Doyon thanked him and moved on. Second find. Widow Carnus's stall in 3 Lanterns Square. Bundles of dried silver fern roots. They were being sold as firewood. 5 copper coins per bundle. The terminal confirmed what Doyon already knew from the night before. When processed correctly, the roots provide the base for ink resistant to magical erasure. He bought 3 bundles. Third find. A box of small vials on the stall of a young guy who was selling everything under the sun. The vials were labeled as empty. 1 copper coin apiece. Doyon took one and held it up to the light. The terminal flashed. At the bottom of each vial was a residue of concentrated moonflower essence. Trace amounts, but enough for an alchemist to use as a starter for a new batch. A single vial with such a residue costs 5 silver coins from a wholesaler in Second Circle. Doyon bought all 12. By noon, he returned to the shop with 3 sacks, having spent a total of 3 marcods and 17 copper coins. His mother watched as he laid out his purchases on the counter. She asked why he had bought broken stones and dry sticks. Doyon replied that it was for resale. His mother shook her head, but she didn't argue. Barrick's 50 marcods lay in a tin box under the floorboards, and his mother decided that her son had the right to experiment. Doyon spent the next 2 hours preparing. He washed the stones and sorted them by size. He went through the roots and set aside the ones in the best condition. He wiped down the vials and carefully sealed them with wax so the remaining essence wouldn't evaporate. Then he dressed in the best clothes he could find in the former owner's closet: a clean shirt, pants without holes, a belt. He looked at himself in the cloudy mirror. A skinny guy with dark circles under his eyes. Not exactly trustworthy. But the terminal showed him something else. When Doyon looked at his own reflection, no data appeared, just static. Just like with his mother. He couldn't scan himself. Fine, he'd go not with a face, but with numbers. The second circle began 4 blocks from the shop. The difference was immediately apparent. Paved streets instead of dirt, streetlights instead of torches, gilded signs, the smell of spices, not garbage, guards at every intersection. Doyon walked with confidence. The memory of the former owner guided him. He had been here before. He used to haul boxes for wholesalers when he worked part-time as a porter. He knew the layout of the workshops. First stop, Torn Bessel's Alchemical Workshop. Medium-sized, 3 apprentices. Specialization, potions for hunters. Doyon entered. The apprentice behind the counter looked him up and down, asked what he wanted. Doyon placed a single filter stone on the counter, said he had a batch of 20 such stones. He could vouch for the quality. The price was 2 silver coins apiece for a bulk purchase. The apprentice took the stone. He turned it over in his hand. He called for the master. Thorn Bessel emerged from the back room, an elderly man with acid burns on his hands. He looked at the stone, held it up to the light, scraped a crack with his fingernail. His eyebrows shot up. He asked where Doyon had found filter stones of such quality. Doyon replied that he had a supplier on the outer circle. T. Thorn asked about the price. Doyon repeated it. 2 silver pieces per stone. Thorn smirked. He said he usually buys through the wholesaler Gren for 3 silver pieces, but the quality is worse. He offered 2 silver and 5 copper. Doyon agreed, but on one condition. If the quality was satisfactory, the next shipment would be in 2 weeks, and he would be the first buyer. Thorn nodded. They shook hands. 50 silver for 20 stones. That's about 2.5 marcods. With costs at 20 copper, the margin was insane. But Doyon didn't let it show. He thanked the craftsman and left. Second stop, Linden the enchanter's workshop on the next street. Doyon sold him 3 bundles of silver fern roots. He explained that they could be used to make ink for magically durable inscriptions. Linden didn't know that. He checked. He confirmed it. He bought all 3 bundles for 15 silver coins. The third stop turned out to be the most difficult. Doyon found the workshop of an alchemist named Nessa Ohm, a young woman with a sharp gaze. Specialization? Second-class regeneration potions, the very ones that require moonflower essence. Doyon laid 12 vials on the table. Nessa picked one up and held it to the light. Her eyes widened. She asked how much he wanted. Doyon named his price. 4 silver coins per vial. Nessa looked at him for a long time. She said that was below market value. She asked what the catch was. Doyon said there was no catch. He said he wanted to become her regular supplier. The first batch at a reduced price, the next at market price. Nessa thought for about 10 seconds. Then she nodded. 48 silver. Doyon stepped out onto the street of the second circle. The sun was high in the sky. He did the math in his head. Total revenue for the day, 113 in silver. That's about 5 marcods and 65 in silver. With costs of 3 marcods and 17 copper coins, net profit of about 2.5 marcods. Not much. For the first day. But it wasn't about the profit. It was about 3 things. First, he now knew 3 buyers in the outer circle who were willing to buy goods directly. A sales channel. Second, he knew that the outer circle was overflowing with goods that could be resold at a markup ranging from 300 to 2,000%. A stockpile. Third, no one had paid him any attention. A small-time merchant from the outer circle who had sold a handful of goods to 3 workshops. Invisible. That was exactly what he wanted. To grow quietly. Not to attract attention. Until he was firmly enough on his feet that he couldn't be knocked over. He returned to the shop by evening. His mother was preparing dinner. Porridge, but this time with butter. Doyon placed the money on the table. 5 marcods and silver. His mother dropped her spoon. She looked at the money. She looked at her son. She asked where it came from. Doyon replied that he had sold stones and roots and vials. His mother said the stones were broken. Doyon said they weren't broken, but special, and that there are people who understand that. His mother sat down on a stool. She was silent for a long time. Then she asked, "Son, what happened to you? You're different." Doyon looked at her. The terminal was silent, a gray hum. He couldn't read his mother. He couldn't see what she was feeling through the numbers, and that was right. Some things shouldn't be measured. He replied that he had simply started looking closely. His mother didn't believe him, but the money was real. For the next 10 days, Doyon worked the same routine. In the morning, a tour of the outer circle, searching for undervalued goods. In the afternoon, a trip to the second circle, sales. In the evening, accounting and planning. Every day he expanded his route. Every day he found something new. On the fourth day, he discovered a bundle of sleep amulets at an old man's stall on the edge of the market. They were considered broken. The terminal showed that they weren't broken, but had been reprogrammed. Instead of sleep, they induced a mild trance. Healers use these for pain relief. Their price in the second circle is 3 times higher than that of ordinary sleep amulets. On the seventh day, he found a batch of iron blanks being sold as scrap. The terminal revealed that the iron contained traces of mithril. A negligible amount, but enough for a blacksmith to use them for practice work with mithril. Blanks like these are bought by blacksmith apprentices for good money. By the end of the 10th day, Doyon had 3 regular customers in the second circle: Thorn Bassel, an alchemist; Linden, an enchanter; and a new client, Greta Solm, the owner of a medicinal herb shop on the second circle. She began buying raw materials from Doyon after he offered her herbal blends formulated according to a recipe suggested by the terminal. Each blend was 10 to 15% more effective than the standard version. Greta didn't ask how he knew the formula. She simply checked the results and bought more. Revenue was growing. 3 marcods a day, 5, 7. By the end of the second week, Doyon was consistently earning 10 marcods a day. The debt remained 400 marcods. Una kept coughing. On the 11th day, Doyon stood in 3 Lantern Square and watched the crowd. Early morning, vendors were setting out their wares. Shoppers hadn't arrived yet. But one person was already there. A girl of about 22, short, dark hair tied in a bun, weather-beaten hands, red. She stood in front of a stall with herbs and was carefully arranging the bundles by size. Her stall was small and meager, but the herbs lay neatly and by color. It was noticeable. Doyon approached. The terminal activated. He looked at the herbs. Standard blends, medicinal, cough, cold, joint pain. Standard prices, 0 markup. But one bundle in the corner of the tray flashed red. Doyon picked it up. A homemade cough remedy, not made to the standard formula. The terminal displayed the analysis and Doyon froze. 12% more effective than the official pharmacy formula. 12%. That's a lot. It means this mixture cures a cough faster and more effectively than what certified third circle pharmacists sell. And it costs 2 pennies. Doyon looked at the girl. She noticed his gaze and tensed up. She was used to people looking down on her, used to people picking up her wares and putting them back with a smirk. He asked her name. Mina Solveig. He asked who had formulated this mixture. She said she had, based on her father's notes and her own observations. She added that it was nonsense, just herbs. He put the mixture back. He looked her in the eyes. He said 3 words she would remember for the rest of her life. This isn't nonsense. Then he asked what she did for a living. Mina told him, briefly, without complaint. Her father had been an herbalist on this very street. He went bankrupt 2 years ago when manufacturers from the eastern provinces started selling mass-produced potions at half price. Her father couldn't take it and drank himself to death. Mina got a job mopping floors at a wealthy shop on the third circle. The owner yelled at her every day, called her armless. After 6 months, she left and returned to the outer circle. She traded from the street, earned pennies. Doyon listened. The terminal showed sentiment, but he didn't look at the numbers. He didn't need numbers to see that sitting before him was a person who had been robbed of faith in her own hands. He made her an offer, not a handout, a job, a spot in the shop, responsibilities, compounding remedies according to her own recipes, purchasing and preparing herbs, a salary, 1 marcad a day, plus 10% of the sales from her mixtures. Mina was silent for a long time. Then she asked why he wanted this. Doyon answered honestly. He said her recipes were better than those of the third circle apothecaries and that he wanted to sell them. He said he needed someone who knew their way around herbs. He said he saw value where others saw only weeds. Mina agreed. Not right away. At first, she said she'd think it over. She came the next morning, with a small bag of belongings. The first thing she did was sort through all the herbs on the shop shelves. She threw half of them away because they were past their prime and had lost their potency. She set a quarter aside to dry. She sorted the rest. By evening, the shelves looked different. Not like a warehouse, but like a pharmacy. Her mother watched this in silence. Then she took her son aside. She asked where he would get 1,000 a day for a salary. Doyon showed her the ledger, his own, a new one. It contained all the transactions from the past 10 days, income, expenses, profit. His mother looked at the numbers for a long time. Then she looked up, and there was something new in her eyes. Not fear, not distrust, surprise. Quiet, cautious surprise. She said, "Okay," and returned to the counter. On the 13th day, Doyon made his first major move. The terminal showed him something interesting. The demand curve for fire moss, a rare ingredient for warming potions. Early frosts were expected in the northern provinces in 3 weeks. The terminal calculated the probability. 78%. With early frosts, the fire moss harvest in the northern provinces is destroyed. Supply drops, demand remains. The price rises. Right now, fire moss on the outer circle cost 4 silver per bundle. In 3 weeks, it would cost 12, at least. Dion spent the whole day making the rounds of the outer circle. He bought every bit of fire moss he could find, 19 bundles. Cost 76 silver, about 4 marcads. That was a lot, almost half his daily turnover. Mina asked why he needed so much fire moss. Doyon explained, simply. Without using terms from his world, he said that in 3 weeks the price would go up because there would be frosts in the north and the moss would become more expensive. Mina looked at him. She asked how he knew about the frosts. Doyon said he looked at the data, at trade reports, at weather patterns. Mina didn't understand the word patterns. Doyon said regularities. Mina nodded, but it was clear she didn't fully believe him. Never mind. In 3 weeks, she would believe him. For now, there were other matters to attend to. Yuna was getting worse. Her cough had grown worse. At night, she was gasping for air, and her mother sat with her until morning. Doyon could hear through the wall as her mother quietly hummed a lullaby, the same one she sang when Yuna was little. In the morning, Doyon got up and went to the third circle, for the first time. The border between the second and third circles was palpable. Not a wall or a gate, a line on the pavement, a blue strip of paint. On one side, the second circle, with its workshops and sturdy signs. On the other, the third circle. This is where true wealth began. Marble instead of stone, glass instead of mica, magical lamps instead of oil ones, guards in uniform, shops with gilded doors. Doyon felt like a foreign body. A skinny guy from the outer circle in a clean but cheap shirt. People were giving him dirty looks. He was looking for a clinic. The memory of his former master suggested the address. The clinic of the healer Orman G. Race, a specialist in lung diseases, the best in the third circle. Doyon found the building. White stone, wide windows, a price list at the entrance. Initial examination, 5 marcads. Full course of treatment for stage 2 lung rot, 200 marcads. Stage 3, 500 marcads. Doyon stood in front of the sign. The terminal displayed the clinic's data. Prices were marked up 40% above cost. The fair price for a Stage 2 course? 120 marcads. But fair price and market price are two different things. Orman Grace could charge any price because there were no other specialists in lung rot on the third circle. Monopoly. A classic monopoly. Doyon turned around and walked back. He couldn't pay 200 or 120 right now, but he remembered the clinic. He remembered the prices. He remembered the face of the clerk behind the counter who looked at him and turned away without asking what he wanted. He remembered. On the 16th day, what Doyon had been waiting for, but wasn't ready for, happened. A man came into the shop. Not a customer, not a buyer, just a man. A man in his 30s, wearing a gray jacket. An ordinary face, nothing remarkable. He walked in, looked at the shelves, touched a few items, and left. He didn't buy anything. He didn't ask anything. The terminal showed a sentiment reading. Confidence, 96. Haste, 0. Hidden stress, 0. Curiosity, 100. Doyon froze. 0 stress and 100% curiosity. This isn't a customer. This is an observer. Someone sent him to check out Han's shop. Growing faster meant taking risks. Doyon knew that. In his past life, he'd seen funds that grew too fast collapse overnight. But he'd also seen those who grew too slowly starve to death before they could become strong. Yuna was coughing. Every night it got worse. He didn't have the luxury of caution. On the 17th day, Doyon changed his strategy. Instead of buying up junk and selling it to workshops, he decided to take one big step. To stop being a middleman and become a manufacturer. Mina. She was the key. Her fees from the road were 12% more effective than those from the apothecary, but she sold them for 2 copper coins apiece. Doyon sat her down at the table one evening after the shop closed and asked her to write down all the recipes she knew. Mina looked at him, confused. She asked, why? Doyon explained. He wants to create a product line under the Han's Shop brand. Not just loose herbs, but ready-made medicinal mixtures, with a name, with a description, with dosages, just like the apothecaries of the third circle do, only cheaper and better. Mina was silent for a minute. Then she pulled a small notebook out of her apron pocket, an old, worn, with her father's handwriting on the first pages and her own on the rest. 37 recipes. Doyon took the notebook. He flipped through it. The terminal analyzed each recipe. 23 out of 37 were more effective than the standard ones, some by 5%, some by 20%. 3 recipes had no equivalents on the market at all. One of them, a mixture to ease breathing in cases of lung rot. Not a cure, relief. But the terminal showed that with regular use, the mixture slowed the progression of the disease by 40%. Doyon stopped on that page. He reread the ingredients. Moon yarrow, silver fern root, night violet pollen. All of this was on the floor of his shop or sold for copper coins on the outer circle. Cost per serving? 6 copper coins. Effect? Slows the progression of lung rot by 40%. The apothecary's equivalent on the third circle, 10 silver coins per serving. Effect of the equivalent. Slows it by 25%. Doyon closed the book. He looked at Mina. He said she wasn't an assistant. He said she was the chief herbalist of the trading house. He said he would sell what she made. Mina dropped the spoon she'd been stirring her tea with. She picked it up. Her hands were shaking. She asked, which trading house? Doyon answered, ours. The next day, he started. Mina prepared the mixtures, 5 types to begin with: cough, cold, joint pain, insomnia, and, most importantly, easing breathing for lung diseases. Doyon handled the packaging and sales. He spent a markad on clean paper and ink. Each blend was wrapped in paper with an inscription: name, ingredients, directions, dosage, the herbalist's name. Mina Solveig. No one in the outer circle did things that way. Herbs were sold in bundles without labels. The buyer had to figure out what to do with them on their own. Doyen introduced what was called branding in his world: name, packaging, information, trust. He took the first batch not to the second circle, but to the neighbors, to the shopkeepers of the outer circle, to those who couldn't afford a third circle apothecary. The price of Mina's mixtures was 5 times lower than the apothecary's, yet the quality was higher. Doyon went door to door. He offered samples. He explained the ingredients. He answered questions. First day, 2 mixtures sold. Second day, 4. Third day, 9. By the end of the first week of this new approach, Doyon was selling 20 mixtures a day. Average price, 3 silver. Revenue, 60 silver. 3 markads. Plus his usual resale profit, 10 markads. Total, 13 markads a day. Growth. But the main thing wasn't the money. The main thing was that people started coming on their own. On the 5th day, a woman came to the stall with a sick child. She said a neighbor had recommended it. She bought a cough remedy. She returned 3 days later. She said the child was feeling better. She bought some more. On the 7th day, an old man with a chronic cough came in. On the 9th day, 2 men from the neighboring block came in. They were building a house and both had sore joints. Mina greeted each one. She asked about their symptoms. She put together a mixture. Sometimes she adjusted the ingredients right in front of the customer. She'd add a pinch of this, remove a pinch of that. People looked at her and saw not a saleswoman, but a herbalist, a real one. Who knows what she's doing? Doyon watched this and thought that, in his world, this would be called customized service. Here, it was simply called care. On the 21st day after waking up in his new body, a woman entered the shop whom Doyon hadn't expected. An old woman, bent over, with a cane, with a single copper coin in her trembling hand. She asked for something for a cough, for her grandson. Doyon looked at her. The terminal displayed a sentiment reading, despair, 93%, hope, 4%. He didn't look at the other numbers. He turned to the shelf. He took a ready-made mixture, a cough mixture, the best of those Mina had made. Market price, 4 silver coins. He wrapped it in clean paper. He took the copper coin from her trembling hand. He placed it on the counter. He said, "Grandma Helen, it's a special today. This mixture costs exactly 1 copper coin. Come back in a week. There will be a second batch, also for a copper coin." The old woman looked at him, then at the package in his hands, then back at him. She nodded and walked toward the door, slowly, with her cane. The door closed. Silence. Doyon stood behind the counter. Mina stood by the shelves. She didn't move. Her lips were trembling. She turned away and began sorting through the herbs, faster than usual. Doyon didn't say anything. 2 days later, the whole street knew. Han doesn't rip off beggars. And a week later, it wasn't just beggars coming to Han. Greta Solm from the second circle heard from one of her customers that there was a shop on the outer circle with unusual herbal blends. She came in person. She looked at the selection. She tried 3 blends, and she ordered a batch of 100 for her shop. Wholesale. 2 silver pieces each. 200 silver. 10 markads for a single transaction. When Mina heard the amount, She sat motionless for 5 minutes. Then she asked quietly, "Is that true?" Doyon nodded. He said, "It's true. And this is just the beginning. Because Greta isn't the only one who will want your potions, Mina." Within a week, 3 streets in the outer circle and 5 workshops in the second circle knew about the potions from Han's shop. Doyon started getting orders, not one-offs, but regular ones. Thorn Bissell asked for filter stones to be delivered twice a month. Nessa ordered vials of essence residue on a regular basis. Greta Solm signed a contract for weekly deliveries of the mixtures. Income rose to 20 markads a day. And then the frosts came. Exactly on the 20th day. The terminal had predicted them in 21 days, a 1-day error. Doyon smiled. 1 day. For a 3-week forecast, that was flawless accuracy. News of the frosts in the northern provinces reached Verin in 2 days. The price of fire moss skyrocketed. From 4 silver per bundle to 11 on the first day, to 15 on the second, to 18 on the third. Doyon had 19 bundles bought for 4 silver each. He didn't sell them right away. He waited another day. The price reached 20 silver. He sold. Not wholesale at the market, but directly to Thorn Bessel, who needed the fire moss for warming potions. The price was negotiable. 18 silver per bundle, below market value. But on the condition that Thorn would become Doyon's exclusive buyer of filtering stones. Thorn agreed. 342 silver. 17 markads for a single deal, plus a long-term contract for the stones. Doyon returned to the shop in the evening. He put the money on the table. Mina counted it with him. Total capital, 83 markads. From 0 to 83 markads in 22 days. Mina looked at him. She asked how he knew about the freezes. On the 23rd day, Doyon got up before dawn. Yuna wasn't coughing. He froze for a second. He listened. Silence. Not a peaceful silence, but the kind that makes your heart tighten. He quietly opened the door to her room. Yuna was lying on her side, pale. Her lips had a bluish tint, but her chest was rising and falling. She was breathing. She'd simply grown tired of coughing during the night and fallen asleep. Her mother was sleeping on a stool nearby. Her head rested on the edge of the bed. Her hand lay on her daughter's forehead. Doyon stood in the doorway and watched. The terminal was silent, a gray noise on both screens. On the mother, on the sister. No numbers, no graphs, no forecasts. And that was the terminal's only limitation that Doyon accepted without resentment. Some things shouldn't be data. He closed the door. He went out onto the street. The air smelled of dawn and dust and something bitter from the furnaces in the neighboring block. Doyon stood in front of a bench and thought. He needed 517 markads. He had 83. That left 434. At 20 markads a day and expenses of 7, 13 net a day. 33 days, a little over a month. Yuna didn't have a month. He'd seen how her cough had changed, heard how it had become wet and heavy. The memory of the body's former owner suggested that his father had coughed exactly the same way 2 months before his death. 2 months. Maybe more, maybe less. The terminal didn't work on the people Doyon loved. He couldn't scan Yuna and find out how much time she had left. He could only listen to the cough and count the markads. He needed one big deal. Not a series of small arbitrage plays, but one strike that would bring in hundreds of markads at once. Doyon walked along the outer circle and thought. The terminal scanned everything around him. Stalls, signs, people, goods. And at the intersection of Copper Cauldron Street and Old Wall Alley, he saw something. A small shop. Not even a shop, just a door in the wall with a handwritten sign. Buys old stuff.
Doyon went inside. It was cramped and dark, floor-to-ceiling shelves crammed with junk. Old dishes, rusty tools, broken figurines, rags. Behind the counter sat a skinny old man with one eye. The other was covered with a bandage. Doyon began looking around. The terminal was running. Every item, 3 numbers. Cost price, market price, fair price, junk, 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 almost junk, junk. He walked slowly along the shelves. He touched the items. The terminal updated the data upon contact. Junk, junk. Stop. Doyon stopped. On the bottom shelf in the corner, buried under rags, lay an amulet. Old, darkened, with a crack down the center. Looks like the one sold for a dime on any corner of the outer circle. Doyon picked it up. The terminal flashed. Data streamed in. Type: damage absorption amulet. Class: 4th. Condition: damaged but functional. Hidden property: reverse polarity. The amulet does not reflect damage but absorbs it. It converts a physical blow into thermal energy and dissipates it. Rarity: extremely rare. Last recorded sale of a similar item 8 years ago. A closed auction of the 4th circle. Price: 420 markades. Doyon held the amulet in his hand and held his breath. 420 markades for a single item, for a few coins at a junk shop. He put the amulet back, slowly, carefully,
as if the thing wasn't worth a penny. He turned to the old man, asked how much for the amulet. The old man looked at the amulet, shrugged, said 2 copper coins, said the amulet was broken and nobody wanted it. Doyon didn't haggle, paid 2 copper coins, put the amulet in his pocket, left. He stopped on the street, leaned against a wall. His heart was pounding. 420 markades for 2 copper coins. But selling it would be harder than finding it. You can't sell an amulet of this caliber to a second circle workshop. Thorn Bassell wouldn't understand its value, Nessa even less so. Collectors buy things like this. Military personnel, top-tier mercenaries, people from the 4th and 5th circles. Doyon had no access to those circles. He stood on the street and thought. Then he went back into the shop. He needed to prepare. Before selling the amulet, he had to find out who would buy it, and how to reach that buyer without attracting attention. Because a small merchant from the outer circle who suddenly puts an amulet worth 400 markades up for sale, that's not just suspicious. It's an invitation to every thief and con artist within a 3-circle radius. A surprise awaited him in the shop. His mother was standing behind the counter talking to a young woman, about 20 years old, expensive clothes. Simple cut, but good fabric. Her hair was styled, her hands were clean, no calluses. Her back was straight, the posture of someone who had been taught to sit up straight since childhood. A noblewoman. Or a former noblewoman. The terminal had worked. Sentiment, curiosity, 87%. Insecurity, 62%. Hidden pride, 45%. Desire to prove something, 71%. The girl turned around. She looked at Doyon. She introduced herself. Sera Okten. She said she'd heard about his shop from Greta Solm. She said she was curious about how his business worked. She said she wanted to learn. Doyon looked at her. The terminal displayed numbers, but Doyon wasn't looking at the numbers. He was looking into her eyes. There was something familiar in them. The same thing he saw in the mirror every morning. Hunger. Not physical hunger. The hunger of a person who is not allowed to do what they are good at. He asked what exactly she wanted to do. Sera stumbled. Then she gathered herself. She said she knew 6 languages, that she could memorize numbers on the first try, that she had read all of Varen's trade statutes. but that her family considered it useless. Her father, Octon, an impoverished nobleman, wanted to marry her off to a third-circle merchant, a political marriage. She didn't need a husband. She needed a job. Doyon listened. Her mother stood nearby and listened too. Mina came out of the back room with a bundle of herbs and stopped. 3 women and Doyon in a small shop on the edge of the outer circle. Doyon nodded. He said, "Good." He said he had a job for her, right now. He took out his ledger. He opened it to the page with the last 10 days. 37 transactions, different goods, different prices, different buyers. He said, "Look at this data. Tell me which product brings in the most profit per markad invested." Sarah took the book. Doyon timed her. She flipped through the pages. Her eyes moved quickly. After 4 minutes, she closed the book. She answered, "Filtering stones. Margin 2,100%. Second place, Mina's medicinal blends. Margin 800%. Third, vials with essence remnants. Margin 620. She gave the exact figures. No notes, from memory. Doyon looked at the terminal. The numbers matched. He nodded. He said, "Welcome to the team." Position, analyst. Salary, 1 markad per day plus 5% of the deals she optimizes. Sarah blinked. Then she straightened up, chin up, pride in her gaze. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Shopkeeper." Doyon grimaced. He said, "Just call me Doyon." Sarah shook her head. She said, "No, Mr. Shopkeeper. Goodbye." His mother watched what was happening and said nothing. But that evening she took her son aside. She asked quietly, "Son, are you sure? 2 girls in the shop. People will talk." Doyon looked at his mother. He replied that people talk anyway, that it's better for them to talk about Han having a good team than about Han having an empty shop. His mother sighed, but she didn't argue. For the next 3 days, Doyon worked on the amulet problem. He couldn't sell it directly on the 4th circle. He couldn't put it on the market openly. He needed a middleman, someone who knew buyers in the higher circles, someone he could trust, at least to some extent. And then Doyon remembered. Nessa Ohm, an alchemist from the 2nd circle, his regular customer. The sharp-eyed woman who'd asked what the catch was when he offered her a fair price. Nessa knew people. She brewed potions for mercenaries and hunters. Some of them worked for the 4th circle. Some worked for the 5th. Doyon came to her on the morning of the 26th. He placed the amulet on the table without saying a word. Nessa picked it up, turned it over in her hand, frowned. She asked what it was. Doyon explained, briefly. A 4th-class damage absorption amulet with reverse polarity. It doesn't reflect, it absorbs. It dissipates like heat. The last sale of its kind. 4th circle. 420 markads. Nessa placed the amulet on the table, very carefully, as if it might explode. She looked at Doyon for a long time. Then she asked how he knew that. Doyon replied, "I know my stuff." Nessa was silent. Then she said she knew a certain person, the captain of the Steel Wings Mercenary Company. He works on contracts for the 4th and 5th circles. He needs an amulet like that. He'll buy it, but she wants a cut. 10%. Doyon said 5. Nessa said 8. Doyon said 7 and an exclusive contract to supply moonflower essence for the next 3 months at a fixed price. Nessa thought for about 5 seconds. She agreed. 2 days later, Doyon stood in the back room of Nessa's workshop and looked at the man across from him, Captain Ren Askar. Tall, muscular, a scar across his left eyebrow, heavy hands, calm eyes. The eyes of a man who had seen death and stopped fearing it. Terminal, sentiment, Skepticism, 68. Interest, 42. Bluff, 0. This man wasn't bluffing. He didn't need to. Doyon placed the amulet on the table, explained its properties. Ren took the amulet, turned it over in his hand. Then, without warning, he punched it with his fist. Hard. The amulet glowed a pale gold. A wave of heat swept through the room. Nessa flinched. Doyon didn't move. Ren looked at his fist. No pain, no injury. The amulet had absorbed the blow completely. Ren looked up at Doyon. He asked how much. Doyon named the price. 350 markhads, 70 below market value. Ren could have haggled, but he wasn't a merchant. He was a soldier. He understood the value of something that could save a life. He nodded. He took out his wallet. He counted it out. 350 markhads, in gold and silver. Doyon took the money. His hands didn't tremble. His face was calm. Inside, everything was burning. 350 markhads, minus 24.5 for Nessa, 325.5 net. P plus the 83 he already had, 408 markhads. 400 in debt, 200 for treatment. Total, 600. He had 408. He was short 192. But he could pay off the debt right now. Doyon left Nessa's and didn't go to the shop. He went to Barak Molt's office on 3rd Circle. The office was located in a solid stone building, a sign with gold lettering, Loans and Purchases, Barak Molt and Sons. Doyon went inside. The secretary behind the counter looked at him and tried to play it off. Doyon said he had come to settle the Han family's debt. The secretary fell silent. He called for Barak. Barak came out. He saw Doyon. His expression changed. He remembered the scene with the amulets. The terminal displayed sentiment, irritation 71, fear 22, greed 48. Doyon placed 400 markhads on the table. Exactly, he said calmly. The Han family's debt. 400 markhads. The principal amount, no interest. Barak flushed. He said interest had accrued, that the total amount was 460. Doyon took a piece of paper out of his pocket. An IOU. He pointed to the date. He pointed to the amount. He pointed to the terms. According to the terms of the IOU, interest was charged from the 1st of every month. There were 3 days left until the 1st. Interest for the current month hadn't been charged yet. The amount due was exactly 400 markhads. Doyon knew this because he'd read the note 16 times over the past 3 weeks, and because in his past life he'd spent 3 years reading loan agreements where every comma was worth millions. Barak looked at the receipt, then at the money, then at Doyon. His face was red with anger. But the money was correct, and the receipt was clear. He took the money, wrote out a receipt for payment, stamp, signature. Doyon took the receipt, turned toward the door. Barak called after him, said Doyon would regret it, said the outer circle wasn't a place for smart Alex, said smart Alex got crushed here. Doyon didn't turn around. He walked out. It was sunny outside. He stood on the 3rd Circle pavement with the receipt in his hand. Debt paid off. 400 markhads, 25 days. From 0. He had 8 markhads and some change left in his pocket. Eunice treatment had cost 200. He was almost back to 0 again. But the difference was huge. 3 weeks ago, he had a debt and nothing else. Now he had a shop. A team of 3 people, Mina, Sarah, and himself. 3 regular customers on the 2nd Circle, a growing reputation, Mina's potions, which sold every day, and 8 markhads in the cash register.
Doyon was walking home along the outer circle. The sun was setting. Long shadows fell across the dusty streets. He thought of Yoon, of her blue lips in the mornings, of the cough that was getting worse. 200 marcods. He needed to find them quickly. But damage-absorbing amulets aren't just lying around on every shelf. A find like that happens once in a lifetime. Or never. He needed another way. He walked into the shop. His mother was standing behind the counter. He placed the receipt in front of her. His mother took the paper. She read it. Her hands trembled. She looked up. Doyon saw in her eyes what the terminal couldn't show, what can't be measured by numbers. His mother pressed the receipt to her chest. She closed her eyes. She stood like that for a minute. Then she opened her eyes. They were wet. She said one word. "Thank you." Doyon nodded. He turned away. Because if he had kept looking, his own eyes would have become wet too. And he needed to think. 200 marcods. Yuna. Time. 8 marcods. Doyon sat behind the counter and looked at the coins laid out before him. 8 marcods and a handful of silver. 3 weeks ago, he'd started from scratch and worked his way up to 408. He'd paid 400 toward his debt. He was back to almost zero. But not the zero he'd been before. Back then, he had nothing. Now, he had a machine that made money every day. 20 marcods a day at full capacity. Expenses, 7. Net profit, 13. 200 marcods for Yuna's treatment. That's 15 days. 2 weeks and 1 day. Yuna coughed every night. In the morning, Doyon noticed brown spots on her pillow. Not blood. Not yet blood. Phlegm streaked with blood.
Stage 2 was turning into Stage 3. The memory of the body's former owner spoke clearly. His father had coughed up streaks of blood for 2 months. Then he started coughing up blood. Then he stopped getting up. Then he died. 2 months from streaks to the end. Maybe 3 if the body is strong. Yuna is 14. She isn't strong. Doyon clenched his teeth. 15 days is too long. He needed the way to earn 200 marcods in a week. Not for 2, for 1. He closed his eyes. The terminal flickered in the darkness. Numbers, charts, demand curves. He scrolled through the data on every commodity he'd seen in the last month, looking for an anomaly, a gap, a window. And he found it. Not where he expected. The terminal displayed the demand curve for a single commodity that Doyon had glimpsed a week ago. Moon mushrooms. A basic ingredient for night vision potions. An ordinary commodity. The price was stable. 8 silver per box. Nothing interesting. But the curve for the next 30 days showed a sharp spike. The reason? The terminal calculated the chain of events. In Halim province, where 60% of the continent's moon mushrooms are grown, in 2 weeks, the annual Moon Night Festival will begin. For 3 days, all the farmers stop working. Everyone knows this. But there's a detail few are aware of. This year, the festival coincides with the peak of the rainy season. The rain floods the mushroom beds. Usually, farmers manage to harvest before the rains. This year, because of the festival, they won't make it in time. Crop losses. The terminal calculated it. 40%. The price in 3 weeks? 22 silver per crate. Almost a 3-fold increase. If he buys the mushrooms now for 8 silver each and sells them in 3 weeks for 22, the margin is 175%. But to make 200 marcods, he needs to buy 100 marcods worth of mushrooms. He has 8. Doyon opened his eyes and looked at the ceiling. He needed a loan, or an investor, or a partner. In the morning, he gathered his team. Mina and Sarah were sitting at the table in the back room of the shop. His mother was at the counter. Yuna was asleep. Doyon explained the plan. Not everything, not about the terminal, just about the mushrooms and the festival and the rains and the price spike. Sarah listened with her back straight and a focused expression. When Doyon finished, she asked one question. Where did the data on the timing of the rains in Halim come from? Doyon answered. Trade reports from the last 5 years show that the rains in Halim begin at the same time, with a 3-day deviation. The Moon Night Festival is tied to the lunar calendar. This year, the timing coincides. Sarah nodded. She accepted it. Mina asked something else. She asked where to store the mushrooms. They spoil easily. Doyon replied, The mushrooms are dried. They have a shelf life of 6 months. They can be stored right in the shop. The problem wasn't storage. The problem was money. He needed 100 markades, which he didn't have. Sarah suggested an option. She said she had a dowry, not in money, but in jewelry. Earrings with stones from her grandmother. We could pawn them at the moneylenders, about 40 markades. Doyon looked at her. He shook his head. He said no. He said he wouldn't risk her personal belongings on a business venture. Sarah straightened up even more. Chin up. She said it wasn't his decision. She said it was her money and her risk, and that she alone decided where to invest it. She called him Mr. Shopkeeper and added that if he wanted to give orders, he should buy himself an army. Mina smiled quietly. Doyon blinked. Then he grinned. All right. 40 markades from Sarah, 8 of his. That makes 48. He still needs 52. He thought about it all day. He carried on with business as usual. Mina was packing their belongings. Sarah was studying the ledgers and asking questions that made Doyon raise his eyebrows. She asked why he was selling filter stones for 2.5 silver each when he could get 3. Doyon explained. He said that 2.5 was the price that kept the buyer loyal. Thorn wouldn't switch to another supplier if he saved half a silver on every stone. A long-term contract was more important than a one-time margin. Sarah took notes. Then she asked what a long-term contract meant. Doyon explained. Sarah took notes again. By the evening of the 28th, Doyon found a solution. Not perfect, risky, but the only one available. Thorn Basel, his main buyer, an alchemist from the second circle. Doyon bought stones, essences, and roots for him. Thorn trusted him. Trust is capital. Doyon went to see Thorn in the morning, sat down across from him, placed a document on the table. He'd written it the night before by the light of a candle stub. A proposal for a joint investment. The gist. Doyon is buying up moon mushrooms now at the current price. In 3 weeks, the price will at least double. Thorn invests 60 markades. Doyon invests 40. Profits are split proportionally, 60% to Thorn, 40 to Doyon. Thorn read the document slowly. Then he looked up. He asked how Doyon had decided the price would rise. Doyon explained. The holiday, the rains, the timing, crop losses. Thorn listened. Then he leaned back in his chair. He said it was a guess, not a fact. He said investing 60 markades based on a guess was madness. Doyon didn't argue. Instead, he pulled a second document out of his pocket. A list of all the deals he'd made over the past month, each with a date, purchase price, sale price, margin, total. 37 deals, not a single loss. Average margin 412%. And a separate line. Fire moss. Forecast made 21 days ago. Actual price increase 350%. Time error 1 day. Thorn stared at the list for a long time. Then he looked up. He said 50 markades and 50% profit. Doyon said 55 markades and 55% to Thorn. Thorn smirked. He held out his hand. They shook. Now Doyon had 103 marcads for purchasing. That same day, he began buying up moon mushrooms. Not by himself. He sent Mina to the outer circle, Seru to the second. He kept the small traders between the first and second for himself. The main rule: don't buy too much from a single seller. Don't drive up the price prematurely. Quietly, unobtrusively, little by little. In 3 days, they bought up 91 marcads worth of mushrooms, 114 crates, an average price of 7.5 silver per crate, slightly below market value because Doyon haggled. The mushrooms filled the entire back room of the shop. His mother looked at the mountains of crates and told her son he had gone mad. Doyon replied that perhaps he had. He set aside the remaining 12 marcads for current, Mine's salary, Seta's salary, food, small purchases for regular business. Now he had to wait. 2.5 weeks. Yuna was coughing. On the 30th day, something happened that Doyon hadn't planned on. Seta came in the morning with news. Her father had found out that she was working in a shop on the outer circle. He was furious. He sent a servant with a note. The note said that if Seta didn't return home by evening, he would disinherit her and break off her engagement to the merchant from the third circle. Seta read the note. She folded it neatly. She placed it on the counter. She looked at Doyon. She said calmly, "We don't have an inheritance. I didn't ask for the engagement. Let him break it off." Doyon looked at her. The terminal displayed her emotions. Fear at 47%, determination at 82%, pain at 30%. She was afraid, but she had made up her mind. Doyon nodded. He said one thing. "You need a place to live." Her mother, who had overheard the conversations, sighed. Then, silently, she made up a third bed in Mina's room. Seta moved in that same evening, with a single bag, books, a notebook, and the gemstone earrings she'd pawned for 40 marcads to buy the mushrooms lying in the back room. Doyon saw her sitting on the edge of the bed that evening, staring at the wall. Quietly. No tears. Back straight. He brought her a cup of tea, set it on a stool nearby, said nothing, left. Seta drank the tea. In the morning, she was there, with her notebook, ready to work. The days dragged on. The 31st, the 32nd, the 35th. Yuna was growing weaker. Her cough had become hoarse and wet. Her mother had stopped smiling at customers. Doyon saw this and checked the demand curve for moon mushrooms every evening. The terminal showed, not yet. Too early. The Moon Night Festival is in 5 days, rain in 3. The market doesn't know yet. On the 36th day, the first rumors reached Vaden. A merchant from the north told the second circle that the rains in Halim had started 2 days earlier than usual. The mushroom beds were flooded. The farmers didn't go out to harvest because they were preparing for the festival. The price of moon mushrooms rose that same day, from 8 silver to 11. Doyon didn't sell. On the 37th day, the price reached 14. On the 38th, it reached 17. Mina was getting nervous. She asked if it wasn't time to sell. Sarah was also looking at Doyon expectantly. Doyon replied, "Not yet." On the 39th day, news arrived about the extent of the losses. 45% of the harvest. The terminal had predicted 40, a 5% error on the high side. The price jumped to 21 silver. Doyon said one word. Now. They sold for 2 days, not at the market, directly to the workshops of the second and third circles. Through Nessa, Doyon reached 2 third circle alchemists who needed moon mushrooms urgently. Sarah found another buyer, an enchanter from the border between the third and fourth circles. She conducted the negotiations herself, for the first time.
She returned to the shop with a signed contract for 30 crates at 23 silver each. Her hands were trembling, but her face was calm. Doyon looked at the contract, then at Sarah. He nodded. He said, "Well done." Sarah straightened up, chin up. Her eyes sparkled. She said, "Thank you, Mr. Shopkeeper." By evening on that fateful day, all 114 crates had been sold. The average price was 22 silver per crate. Total revenue, 251 markads.
Minus expenses, 91. Net profit, 160 markads. Thorn Bessel's share, 55%. 88 markads. Doyon's share, 72 markads, plus what was left in the cash register, 8 markads. Total, 80 markads. 200 are needed. There are 80. 120 are missing. Doyon sat at the table and looked at the numbers. Mina sat next to him. Sarah was across from them. They were silent, because they all knew why those 200 markads were needed. Yuna was coughing behind the partition. Then Thorn Bessel did something Doyon hadn't expected. He came to the shop in person, for the first time. He sat down at the table. He looked at Doyon. He said he was pleased with the deal. He said that Doyon had earned him more in a week than his previous supplier had in 6 months. And he placed a leather pouch on the table. 120 markads. Not a loan. An advance payment for deliveries over the next 6 months. Stones, essence, roots, everything Doyon had sold him before. Thorn wanted to secure a supplier, to tie him to himself. It wasn't a gift. It was a contract. 120 markads up front in exchange for guaranteed deliveries at a fixed price. Doyon looked at the pouch. 80 plus 120. 200. Exactly 200. He looked up at Thorn, reached out his hand. They shook hands. Doyon didn't wait until morning. That same evening, he counted the money. 200 markads, wrapped it in a leather pouch, put it in his coat pocket. Went to bed. Didn't sleep. He listened to Yuna coughing through the wall. At dawn on the 41st day, he left the shop and headed for the third circle. The air was cold. Autumn was creeping up on Varen unnoticed. The leaves on the sparse trees along the pavement were beginning to turn yellow. Doyon walked quickly, a blue line on the pavement, the border between the second and third circles. He stepped over it without slowing down. Ormond Grace's clinic stood in its usual place. White stone, wide windows, a price list. Doyon went inside. The administrator behind the counter was the same as last time, a young man with a smooth face and an indifferent gaze. He looked at Doyon, at his clothes, at his hands, at his boots. And a look flashed across his face that Doyon had seen before. An assessment, not of the man, but of his ability to pay. Doyon placed the bag of money on the counter. He said he wanted to sign the patient up for a full course of treatment for stage 2 pulmonary necrosis. The administrator looked at the bag, then at Doyon. His expression shifted slightly. Not respect, just a reassessment. He asked for the patient's name. Doyon gave it. Han Yuna, 14 years old. The administrator wrote it down. He said the initial examination was in 3 days. 5 markads for the exam, 200 for the course. Total, 205. Doyon didn't bat an eye. He placed 205 markads on the counter. He was now 5 markads in the red. But that didn't matter. His regular trade brought in 13 markads net per day. The administrator counted the money. Twice. He wrote out a receipt, the clinic's stamp, the date of the examination. In 3 days.
Doyon took the receipt and went home. His mother was standing at the shop entrance, waiting. She saw that he had left early, saw that he had taken the money. Doyon handed her the receipt. His mother read it.
The letters trembled in her hands. Full course of treatment for pulmonary gangrene. Patient Han Yuna. Orman. Third circle. His mother pressed the paper to her chest, just as she had pressed the receipt for the debt repayment. The same hands, the same gesture. She didn't cry. She just stood there and breathed, deeply and slowly, like a person who had finally taken a breath after a long dive underwater. The 3 days before the examination passed quickly. Doyon worked. Mina packed their belongings. Seta kept records and began compiling what Doyon called a database, a list of all the goods that passed through the shop, with purchase and sale prices, with dates, with buyers' names. Seta did this by hand in a thick notebook, in neat, small handwriting, 6 columns on each page. Doyon looked at her work at the end of the first day and thought that, in his world, she would be keeping tables in Excel. Here, she was Excel. On the 44th day, Doyon took Yuna to the clinic. Her mother walked beside them. Yuna walked slowly. Every 20 steps, she stopped to catch her breath. Thin, pale, dark circles under her eyes, just like her mother's. But her eyes were alive. Yuna looked around. She had never been to the third circle. Marble and glass and magical lanterns. She pointed out the pastry shop window to her mother. Cakes behind the glass. 3 silver coins for a slice. Her mother looked away. Doyon remembered the window. The healer, Orman Grace, turned out to be an elderly man with a gray beard and hands that glowed with a soft green light when he touched a patient. He examined Yuna for a long time, intently. His face was inscrutable. Then he turned to Doyon and her mother. He said the rot was in its 2nd stage, almost the 3rd. Another month, and it would be too late. The course of treatment was 12 sessions, 2 a week, 6 weeks. The outcome was predictable, a full recovery. Her mother covered her face with her hands. Doyon stood beside her and watched Yuna, who was sitting on the couch, staring at the clinic ceiling with stars painted on it. She didn't realize she had just heard a sentence and a pardon in a single sentence. The first session was that same day. Yuna lay on the couch. A green light enveloped her chest. She wasn't coughing, for the first time in weeks. Doyon and her mother sat in the hallway. Her mother was silent. Doyon was too. The terminal hung before his eyes, but he wasn't looking at it. He just sat there. When the session ended, Yuna walked out on her own, without support. She said it was easier to breathe. Doyon bought her a slice of cake at the bakery on the 3rd circle. 3 silver coins. Yuna ate it in small bites and smiled. Her mother watched and smiled too. For the first time in a long time. On the way back, Doyon walked slightly behind. Her mother and Yuna were ahead. Yuna held her mother's hand. Doyon watched them and thought. He thought about how, in his past life, he had no one for whom he could buy a slice of cake for 3 silver coins. Ramen and coffee. Screens and spreadsheets. 38 hours without sleep and a car off the overpass. And an open position on lithium. Here, he had a mother who pressed receipts to her chest. A sister who smiled at the cake. 2 girls at the shop who believed in him. And 434 marks earned in 40 days from scratch, in a world where he wasn't born. Doyon smiled, quietly, to himself. He returned to the shop. Seta met him at the entrance, with news. Bad news. The observer had come again. The same man in the gray jacket. This time, he didn't just look at the shelves. He talked to the neighbors, asked about Han's shop, about sales, about customers, about the new owner. Seta found this out from the Karnas widow, who sold roots next door. The widow said the man in the gray jacket asked very politely and very specifically, not like a customer, like an investigator. Doyon sat down behind the counter. He looked at Seta. He asked what she thought. Seta answered without hesitation. She said someone from the upper echelons was checking up on him. She said that's what they do when a small merchant starts getting in the way of a big one. First, surveillance, then pressure, then destruction. She knew this because her father was a nobleman, and she had grown up among people who played such games. Doyon nodded. Seta was right. Someone had noticed an anomaly. A small shop on the outer circle that had tripled its turnover in a month. It had found regular customers in the second circle. It had bought up all the moon mushrooms before the market learned of the shortage. To someone who could do the math, it looked suspicious. To someone from the Seven Seals Guild, it looked like insider trading. Doyon had to slow down, become inconspicuous, wait it out. But Yuna was undergoing treatment. Mina was working. Era was working. Thorn was waiting for a contract shipment. Slowing down meant losing everything he had built. He couldn't slow down. So he had to prepare for what was coming. Doyon spent the evening planning. He drew up a list of risks. First, the guild revokes the shop's trading license. Countermeasure. All transactions are above board. Documents are in order. Taxes are paid. No formal grounds for revocation. Second, competitors from the third circle are pressuring suppliers. Countermeasure. Diversification. More suppliers, more buyers. Don't depend on a single channel. Third, physical pressure. Extortion. Countermeasure. He has no security, no fighters, nothing but his brain and a terminal. That is his weakest point. Doyon sat poring over the list and thought. He needed someone who could ensure his safety. Not a mercenary for hire, one of his own. Someone who stands by him not for pay, but because they consider Khan's shop their home. And then he remembered. Mina had told him about the blacksmith's shop on the next street. Mina bought herb drying hooks from them. The shop belonged to a girl named Yellow, half-breed, half-dwarf. Strong. Mina said that Yellow could lift an anvil with one hand and that her work was flawless, but no one bought it because factory-made was cheaper. Doyon decided to visit the smithy in the morning. On the 45th day, he stood in front of a low building with a heavy door and a sign that was almost invisible behind the soot. Henri's smithy. He went inside. Inside it was hot, with the smell of metal and the sound of a hammer. A girl stood at the anvil. Tall, broader in the shoulders than Doyon, short haircut. Her hands were scarred from burns. She struck the red-hot metal evenly and precisely. Each blow was like a word in a sentence, without a single... Doyon waited for her to finish. Yellow looked up. She looked at him. She wiped her forehead with the back of her hand. She asked what he wanted. Her voice was low, calm. Doyon asked to see her work. Yellow shrugged. She led him to the wall where the finished items hung. Knives, blades, tools, hooks, loops, all handmade. Doyon walked along the wall. The terminal was running. Every item, 3 numbers. And the figures were striking. A medium-sized blade, the market price of a factory-made equivalent, 2 marcads. The market price of this blade, 3 marcads, but a fair price, considering the quality of the steel, the balance, and the durability, 15 marcads. Yellow's blade will outlast 3 factory-made ones. Its balance is perfect. The steel is hand-forged and contains a microstructure that machine forging cannot replicate. Doyon picked up a knife. He turned it over in his hands, put it back, looked at Yellow, asked how much she sold per month. Yellow answered. 2 blades, 3 knives, a dozen hooks. Total income about 8 marcads. Expenses for coal and metal, 6. Net profit, 2. 2 marcads a month. For work worth hundreds. Doyon made her an offer, not to buy her blades for 3 marcads each and resell them for 10. No. He proposed something else. Custom blades for wealthy clients, engraved with the owner's name, with a certificate of origin, a document confirming who forged the blade, when, from what steel, and by what method, with a certificate of the metal's soul, a term Doyon had just made up on the spot, meaning that every blade was as unique as a fingerprint. The price? 40 marcads apiece, 20 for Yellow, 20 for Khan's shop for sales and promotion. Yellow stood there and looked at him. Then she turned toward the wall of blades, then back again. She asked quietly, 40 marcads for a single blade. Doyon nodded. He said her work was worth it. He said the problem wasn't the quality, but that no one explained to the buyer why a handmade blade was better than a factory-made one. On the 48th day, a red-haired girl walked into the shop and tried to steal 3 amulets from the shelf. Doyon was standing behind the counter and saw everything. She was quick, fingers like a magician's. She slipped past the shelf, and 2 amulets vanished into her sleeve. She took the 3rd one openly, as if examining it, and discreetly slipped it into her bosom. Mina didn't notice. Seta didn't notice. Doyon noticed, because the terminal highlighted the amulets in red the moment they changed location. Object moved. New owner not identified. Doyon didn't shout. He didn't call the guards. He said, quietly, 3 amulets, 2 in the left sleeve, 1 tucked inside her shirt. You can put them back, or we can talk. The girl froze. She turned around. Her eyes were large, green, freckles all over her face. Her red hair was dirty and tangled. Her clothes were torn. She was barefoot. About 19, maybe 18. Terminal. Sentiment. Fear at 89%. Aggression at 62. Readiness to flee at 93. She was ready to bolt for the door. Doyon raised his hand, palm forward, calmly. He wasn't stopping her, just showing he wasn't a threat. Said he wouldn't call security. Said he had a proposal. The girl didn't move. She looked at him. Her eyes darted around. The door, the window. Doyon, the door. Doyon waited. Then he sat down on a stool behind the counter, on purpose. Lower, less threatening. He asked her name. Silence. Then, quietly, Ashley. Ashley May Calvern. Doyon didn't let on that the last name made him shudder inside. Calvern. Like Calvern Toll, the first merchant of Arcadium, the one whose consciousness became the Black Index. A coincidence? Maybe. Maybe not. He asked Ashley where she lived. Ashley shrugged. Nowhere. On the street. In the alleys of the outer circle. He asked what she did. Ashley looked at him like he was an idiot. What she'd just been doing. Doyon nodded. He said, "You're the fastest on the market. I saw it. 2 amulets in a second and a half. Not a single wasted movement. That's a skill." Ashley blinked. No one had ever called theft a skill before. Doyon continued. He said he needed a courier and a scout, someone who knows every alley in the outer circle, who can deliver goods quickly and unnoticed, who can walk through the market and find out what's being sold where and for how much and return with a full report. Pay. 1 marcad a day. Food, a place to sleep. Ashley stood there, motionless. Then she slowly pulled 2 amulets from her sleeve, a 3rd from her bosom. She placed them on the counter. She asked, "Why do you need this? Why not a guard?" Doyon replied. He said that a guard was a waste of time, and a good courier was an investment. Ashley didn't know the word investment.
Doyon said, investment. She nodded. She thought. She asked again, what if I steal from you again? Doyon shrugged. He said that then he'd write it down under expenses and deduct it from her pay. Mina snorted. Sarah raised an eyebrow.
Ashley smiled for the first time during the whole conversation. It was a crooked smile, just one corner of her mouth. She said okay. She stayed. When her mother found out that a street thief was now living in the shop, she didn't sleep all night. But Doyon talked to her, long and patiently. He explained that Ashley knows the outer circle like no one else. Every alley, every merchant, every dealer, every thief. She knows who sells what, where everything is, and when the guard patrols come. That's information. And information in Vedin is worth more than gold. Mother sighed, but she made up another bed. Ashley turned out to be exactly what Doyon had expected, and more. On her very first day on the job, she covered 3 streets of the outer circle and returned with a full report. Verbal, because she couldn't read or write, but she had a photographic memory. She listed 42 stalls, with goods, with prices, with the merchants' names, with the description of the goods' quality, which she determined by touch and smell. Doyon listened and checked against the terminal. Her quality assessments matched the terminal's data 80% of the time. Without any magic, no technology, just street smarts honed by years of survival. He instructed Sarah to teach Ashley to read and count. Sarah looked at him, then at Ashley, then back at him. She said, "Mr. Shopkeeper, I'm an analyst, not a teacher." Doyon replied. He said that an analyst who can't delegate routine tasks isn't an analyst, but an executor. Sarah opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. She said, "Fine." Lessons began that very evening. Ashley sat at the table with chalk and a blackboard. Sarah sat across from her with a pointer. Mina brought tea. Mother shook her head. Yuna came out of the room after another treatment session and sat down next to Ashley, silently. She began drawing with charcoal on a sheet of paper. Ashley glanced at the drawing, then at Yuna. Yuna was drawing a cat. It was bad, but earnest. Ashley said the cat was crooked. Yuna said Ashley's letters were crooked too. Sarah said they were both right and turned her attention back to the blackboard. Doyon stood in the doorway and watched it all. At the bench full of people, at the table with tea, chalk, and paper, at the 4 women and the girl sitting together, each doing their own thing and yet, at the same time, something in common. He thought that in his past life he had never seen anything like this. A hedge fund office at 4 in the morning. The cold light of the monitors, empty coffee cups. Silence broken only by the clicking of keys. Here, it was warm and noisy, and it smelled of herbs and metal from Yellow's hands as she came in for dinner. On the 50th day, Goyon finalized the first sale of a custom-made blade for Yellow. The buyer was found through Nessa, a mercenary from the Steel Wings Company, a friend of Captain Ren Askar. Ren had told him about a guy from the outer circle who sold unusual things. The mercenary arrived. He looked at the blade. Yellow had forged it in a week. Medium-sized, perfect balance, engraved with the owner's name, a certificate of origin on parchment with the seal of Khan's shop, a certificate of the metal's soul, a beautiful document that Sarah had personally drafted using 3 of the 6 languages she knew. The mercenary took the blade. He twirled it. He made 3 swings in the air. His eyes changed. He recognized the difference without words. He paid 45 markads, 5 more than they'd asked for. He said the blade was worth every one. Yellow stood in the corner of the shop and didn't move until the mercenary had left. Then she turned to Doyon. She said, 45. Doyon nodded. 25 to Yellow, 20 to the shop. Yellow went out onto the street. Doyon didn't follow her. Mina walked over to the window and looked out. Then she said quietly, "She's crying." Doyon replied, "Let her." Ashley returned from her rounds just then. She burst into the shop, out of breath. She reported, "There are rumors on the outer ring. Barrick Molt is telling everyone that Hans' shop deals in stolen goods, that the guy's money is dirty, that soon the guild will come and shut him down." Barrick was seeking revenge. Doyon had expected this, but not so soon. Rumors in the market are poison, slow but sure. If customers believe Khan is selling stolen goods, they'll stop coming. Not because they care about the law, but because dealing with someone who's about to be shut down is a sure way to lose money. Doyon thought about it all night. In the morning, he went to see Sarah. He asked her to compile a complete record of all the shop's transactions over the past 2 months. Every purchase, every sale, the source of the goods, the seller's name, the buyer's name, the price, the date, the tax deductions. Sarah worked all day. By evening, she had a 22-page document, neat, detailed, flawless. Doyon took the document and went to the Outer Circle Trade Administration, a small building on the square, 2 officials at their desks. Doyon placed the document in front of the senior official. He said that Khan's shop wanted to undergo a voluntary inspection, a full audit of its commercial activities, on its own initiative. The official raised his eyebrows. In 20 years on the job, no one had ever come to him asking for a voluntary inspection. Usually merchants ran away from inspections. Doyon explained. He said there were rumors of illegal activity at his shop. He said he wanted to refute them with documentation. He asked for an audit to be conducted and for an official certificate of clean trade to be issued. The official looked at the document, 22 pages of impeccable records, then at Doyon. He nodded. The inspection took 2 days. On the 58th day, Doyon sat in the back room of the shop and looked at the ledger. The numbers were good. 25 matkads a day, 30 on good days. The team worked like a well-oiled machine. Mina prepared the supplies, Ashley delivered and scouted, Sarah handled the accounting and analysis, Yellow forged personalized blades, 1 blade every 10 days. Each sold for 45 or 50 markads. Yuna had completed 6 of 12 sessions. Her coughing had become less frequent. Her lips no longer turned blue in the morning. Her mother smiled at customers, and it was a genuine smile, not a mask. Everything was going well. Too well. Doyon knew that feeling. In his past life, it came the day before the market crashed. When all the charts are green and all positions are in the black, and you sit and wait because things don't stay that way. Something is going to go wrong now. It happened on the 59th day. In the morning, a woman walked into the shop, around 40 years old. Expensive clothes, but not flashy. Dark hair with silver streaks. A calm face. Attentive eyes. Not cold, but calculating. The eyes of a person accustomed to evaluating everything and everyone. Terminal. Sentiment. Confidence 94. Haste 0. Interest 78. Hidden threat 23. 23% hidden threat. Not much, but not 0. The woman introduced herself. Rena Ilm, sales representative for the 4th Circle. She said she'd heard of Khan's shop. She said she was impressed by its growth. She said she'd come with a business proposal. Doyon offered her tea. Rena sat down. She sipped her tea slowly. She surveyed the shop with her eyes. The shelves, the merchandise, Mina's collections in neat packages, the certificate on the wall, Seru at the table with a notebook. Then she spoke. The proposal was simple. A partnership. Hans' shop would supply goods to the 4th Circle chain of shops through Rena.
The volumes were large, the revenue was high. Rena would take a 20% commission. Doyon listened. The terminal analyzed every word. The bluff scale? 31%. She wasn't lying completely, but she was holding something back. Doyon asked who she worked for. Rena smiled. She said she worked for herself. Doyon shook his head. He said that a representative of the fourth circle doesn't come to a shop in the outer circle without a reason. That a 20% commission is too low for the fourth circle. And if she was self-employed, why would she need a small supplier from the outskirts? Rena stopped smiling. She looked at Doyon for a long time. Then she said, "Fine." She said she worked for the Terran family. The Terrans. The very ones whose stolen amulets Barrack had tried to offload through Han's shop on the first day. Doyon didn't move. His face was calm. Inside, his brain was working at full capacity. The Terrans knew about him. They knew he'd figured out the amulet scheme. They knew Barrack had paid him 50 markades for his silence. And now they'd come not to seek revenge, but to buy. That was worse than revenge. Revenge is predictable. Buying meant they wanted to control him. Doyon asked what exactly the Terrans needed. Rena explained. The Terrans were losing ground in the amulet market. Mass-produced goods from the eastern provinces were undercutting them on price. The Terrans' handcrafted products couldn't compete. They needed a new sales channel, a new approach. They'd heard that Khan's shop could sell things for more than they were worth. Personalized blades, branded collections, certificates of origin. The Terrans wanted the same for their amulets. Doyon sat and thought. The offer was tempting. Access to the fourth circle's resources, volume, money, connections. But the Terrans are the Terrans. A family that offloaded stolen goods through shady shops. A family whose shipments vanished from the registry. Working with them meant standing alongside them. And when they fall, and they will fall, because that's what happens to anyone who builds a business on theft and deceit, then Khan will fall along with them. Doyon finished his tea. He set down the cup. He looked at Rena. He thanked her for the offer. He said he'd think about it. Rena nodded. She stood up. She turned around at the door. She said that the Terrans don't like it when people think too long. She left. Seta approached as soon as the door closed. She asked quietly, "What are you going to do?" Doyon replied, "I'll refuse." Seta nodded. She said she'd expected that. Then she said something else. She said that if Doyon refused the Terrans, they would take it as a threat, not as a refusal, but as a declaration of independence. And an independent merchant in the outer circle who refuses a house of the fourth circle is a challenge. Doyon knew that, but he accepted it. 2 days later, Rena came for an answer. Doyon said no, politely, calmly, without explanation. Rena wasn't surprised. She nodded. She left. On the 63rd day, the consequences began. 3 suppliers on the outer circle refused to sell Doyon their goods. They didn't explain why. They just said no and turned away. Old Man Gat, who sold him filter stones, apologized, quietly. He said he'd been threatened. He didn't say who, but Doyon knew anyway. The Terran were pressuring the suppliers, a classic tactic. If you can't buy a man, cut him off from his resources. Doyon gathered a team. He explained the situation. Mina turned pale. Ashley clenched her fists. Sarah sat with her back straight and took notes. Yellow was silent, but her hand rested on the handle of the hammer she'd brought with her from the smithy. Doyon said that panicking wouldn't help. He said they needed to find new suppliers, ones the Terrans had no influence over. Ashley. She had a mission. To go around the outer districts of the outer city, the ones beyond the old city wall. People trade there who aren't connected to the houses of the upper circles. Find stones, herbs, whatever is needed. Ashley nodded and disappeared. She returned 6 hours later with a map, sketched by hand on a scrap of cloth.
Sarah traced it into a notebook. 14 new supply points. Prices slightly higher than the old suppliers, but the goods are there. Do-yeon looked at the map and at Ashley. Ashley stood by the door, dirty and tired and satisfied. Do-yeon said, "Perfect." Ashley sniffed, turned away, mumbled that it was nothing and that she could do more. By the 65th day, the situation had stabilized. The new suppliers were working. Turnover had dropped slightly, from 25 marcads to 20. But the shop held on. The Terrans were waiting. Do-yeon, too. He knew that the first wave of pressure was reconnaissance, a test of strength, to see if he would break or not. He didn't break, so the second wave would be tougher. On the 67th day, it came. Not through the suppliers, through the customers. Thorn Bessel came to the shop in person. His face was gray. His voice was quiet. He said he'd been offered a contract to supply filter stones from another supplier at 1.5 silver per piece, half the price of Do-yeon's. He'd checked the quality. Acceptable. He didn't want to leave Do-yeon, but business is business. If Do-yeon didn't lower the price, he'd leave. Do-yeon sat and listened. The terminal displayed Thorn's sentiment. Shame, 44%. Fear, 38%. Sincerity, 73%. Thorn wasn't lying. He really had been offered a deal, and he really didn't want to leave. But 1.5 silver is 1.5 silver. Do-yeon asked who the supplier was. Thorn hesitated. Then he said, "A middleman from the Terran house." Do-yeon nodded. Here it is, the second wave. Dumping. Selling below cost to squeeze out the competition. In his world, it was called predatory pricing. Here, it was called simply war. Do-yeon didn't lower the price. Instead, he did something else. He pulled a document out of his desk drawer, a certificate of origin for the filter stones. Each stone had a number, with a description of its properties, with a 6-month quality guarantee. If the stone failed within 6 months, Do-yeon would replace it for free. He placed the document in front of Thorn. He said, 2.5 silver per stone with a replacement guarantee, or 1.5 without a guarantee. In a month, when Thorn's third cheap stone breaks in the middle of brewing an expensive potion, he'll calculate the losses from the ruined raw materials and realize that 2.5 is cheaper than 1.5. Thorn looked at the document, at the warranty, at the seal of Khan's shop. Then he looked up. He said, Do-yeon, you're a strange guy. He took the document. He stayed. But Do-yeon knew this was a temporary victory. Dumping doesn't work immediately. It works through fatigue, through exhaustion, over time. The Terrans could sell below cost for months. They had the Fourth Circle's money. Do-yeon didn't. He needed a plan, not a tactical one, a strategic one. On the evening of the 68th day, he sat alone in the back room. Everyone had gone to sleep, even Sarah, who usually worked late. Do-yeon sat in the dark and stared at the terminal. He scrolled through the data. He searched. And he found it. Not a product, not a deal. Information. The terminal revealed something about the Terran household that the Terrans themselves would not want the public to see. 3 weeks ago, he had run his hands over Barrick's armor, Barrick's amulet, and the terminal recorded data about the manufacturer. Batch 417, removed from the registry. But the terminal had stored everything it had seen, and now, when Do-yeon searched, he found a connection. Batch 417 wasn't the only one deleted. Through the supply chain that the terminal reconstructed using data from the amulet, Do-yeon saw that the Terrans were systematically removing batches from the registry and selling them through front buyers. Barrick was one of a dozen. Scale: 3,000 amulets over the past year. Total value: about 5,000 markads. Tax evasion, registry fraud. If this information reached the Third Circle Trade Authority, the Terrenes would lose their license. Doyon closed his eyes. Information is a weapon. But a weapon that fires both ways. If he used this data directly, went to the board and reported it, the Terrenes would find out it was him. And then, the third wave would not be economic, but physical. He needed another way. Not a head-on attack. A setup. A way to force the Terrenes themselves to expose their own fraud in public. In front of witnesses. In front of people who wouldn't be able to look away. Doyon began planning. The plan took 10 days to prepare. Doyon worked at night. During the day, it was business as usual. In the evening, planning. Every step was calculated. Every participant in their place. Every risk accounted for. The gist was as follows. The Terrans sold decommissioned amulets through front buyers. The buyers offloaded the goods to small shopkeepers. The shopkeepers didn't know the goods were stolen and were listed as the final owners. When the authorities raided, they arrested the shopkeepers. The Terrans remained clean. The scheme worked because no one could link the buyers directly to the Terrans. Doyon could. The terminal saw the chain: manufacturer, batch number, date of write-off, buyer's name, all in one amulet. But the terminal data couldn't be presented as evidence. No one had seen the terminal except Doyon, so he had to force the Terrans to reveal the connection themselves, out in the open, in front of witnesses. Doyon started with Ashley. He sent her on a reconnaissance mission. The task? To find the dealer the Terrans are currently working with. Not Barrick. Barrick had gone into hiding after the amulet incident. Someone new. Ashley found him in 3 days. A dealer named Varden Crossed. He worked at the junction of the second and third circles. A small office. A sign. Appraisal and purchase of artifacts. Ashley described him. Skinny. Nervous. Drinks. Loves cards. Loses a lot. Debts. The terminal confirmed it. Doyon went to see Varden, posing as a small-time dealer who wanted to offload a batch of amulets. Not to buy, to sell. Varden grew suspicious, asked what kind of amulets. Doyon showed him 3 ordinary protective amulets bought at the market for half price. Standard, dart-shaped. Legal. Varden looked, lost interest. Said he doesn't buy cheap stuff. Doyon nodded, apologized, left. But while he was inside, he touched 4 amulets on Varden's shelf, accidentally, in passing. The terminal processed the data. 3 out of 4, batches removed from the registry. Manufacturer, Terrena. Date of write-off, 2 to 6 weeks ago. Doyon smiled. Now he knew where the goods were. He knew when they had arrived. All that remained was to arrange for the right people to see it. Step 2. Ira Vossen. Doyon didn't know her personally yet, but he knew about her. Mina had mentioned the Grey Heron Tea House at the junction of the 4th and 5th circles, the place where all of Arcadium's gossip converged. The proprietress, a young woman. She knew everything about everyone. Doyon went to the Grey Heron on the 72nd day. It was the first time he had been so far from the outer circle. The 4th circle. Another world. Buildings of white and gray stone. Magic lanterns at every turn. Guards in uniformed cloaks. The scent of expensive incense. People dressed so that a single one of their belts cost more than Doyon's entire wardrobe. The tea house stood on a quiet street. A wooden sign with a gray heron painted on it. Inside, it was warm and dim, and the smell of tea that made your head spin. Low tables, cushions on the floor, soft music. A girl stood behind the counter, 23 years old.
A long, light brown braid, a soft face, a friendly yet meaningless smile. Eyes that noticed everything. A terminal. Sentiment. And right then, Doyeon saw something unusual. The gauges were jumping. Not stable readings, but constant recalibration. As if the person behind the counter was changing her mood every 2 seconds. Or as if the person behind the counter was controlling what they showed on the outside with such precision that the terminal couldn't latch on to the present. A professional informant. Doyeon approached the counter, sat down, asked for tea. Any kind, whatever she recommended. The girl looked at him, assessed him in half a second. Clothes, hands, posture, accent, where he came from. She handed him a cup. Oolong. Doyeon tasted it, closed his eyes, opened them, looked at her, said, "You have the best oolong he'd ever tasted." That was all he wanted to say. The girl blinked, just a little, barely noticeable. The terminal showed a split-second spike. Confusion. Genuine confusion, not a game. For a single second, she didn't understand what was expected of her. Because nothing was expected of her. Doyeon finished his tea, paid, left a tip. Left. Didn't ask about anything, didn't ask for information, didn't introduce himself, just drank his tea and left. He returned 2 days later. Tea again. Oolong again. Again, no questions. On the third visit, the owner sat down across from him herself. She introduced herself. Ira Vossen. She asked who he was. Doyeon gave his name. Han Doyeon.
A shop on the outer ring. Herbs and odds and ends. Ira raised an eyebrow. She said she'd heard of him. Doyeon asked what exactly. Ira smiled. She listed it off. The guy who built a shop from scratch in 2 months, who turned down the Terran, who received the only purity certificate on the outer circle, who sells a half-breed blacksmith's blades at the price of fourth circle weapons, and from whom grandmothers buy medicine for a penny. Doyeon listened. She knew everything about him, or almost everything. He asked where she heard it. Ira shrugged. She said that was her job, to know. Doyeon nodded. Then he fell silent. He drank his tea. He took his time. Ira sat across from him and waited. She was used to waiting. People who came to her always wanted something. Information, a contact, a connection, a favor. Everyone came with a request. Doyeon was silent. Ira couldn't hold out any longer. She asked, "What do you want from me?" Doyeon set down his cup. He looked her in the eyes. He answered, "Nothing. I came for tea. The tea is excellent." Ira looked at him. The terminal showed another spike of confusion, longer than the first, 3 seconds. She didn't understand him, and that was unusual for her. She understood everyone. Doyeon stood up. He thanked her for the tea. He walked to the door, stopped at the door, turned around, said one thing. Said that if she ever wanted to talk, not for work, but just because, he was usually at the shop from morning till night. And he left. 5 days later, Ira came to the shop, on the outer circle. She, who hadn't left the fourth circle for months, she came. She stood at the entrance and looked at the crooked sign and the cheap door and the dusty street. Then she went inside. Doyeon was standing behind the counter. Mina was sorting through herbs. Sera was writing something in a notebook. Ashley was sitting on the floor, reading the primer Yuna had given her, sounding out the syllables. Ira looked at all of this, at the small shop full of people, warmth, and work. Then she looked at Doyeon. She said, "I want to work with you, not for the money." Doyeon nodded. He wasn't surprised. He offered her tea. They sat down in the back room. Doyeon explained the situation with the Tureens, briefly, without unnecessary details. He said he needed information, not gossip,
but concrete facts.
Which officials in the Third Circle Trade Administration don't take bribes from the Terrans? Who in the Third Circle has suffered from their schemes? Who is willing to testify if they know they'll be protected? Ira listened. Her eyes were calm. Her hands were folded in her lap. When Doyon finished, she nodded. She said she would give an answer in 3 days. She gave it in 2. Names: 4 officials, 2 merchants, 1 former buyer whom the Terrans had abandoned after he was caught by the guards. All are ready to speak. All are waiting for a reason. Doyon got his reason. The third step: a setup deal. Doyon sent Ashley to Varden Crossed, not her personally. Through a street urchin, he paid 2 copper coins. The urchin delivered a note to Varden from an anonymous buyer. The note said the buyer was looking for a large batch of protective amulets. Inexpensive, no paperwork. Varden took the bait. He replied through the same street urchin. He had the goods. 20 pieces, 10 silver each, no paperwork. The meeting was at Old Wall Square, the day after tomorrow at noon. Doyon didn't show up for the meeting himself. A man came whom Ira had found, a former Terran buyer named Olt, the very one they had abandoned. Olt came to Varden as a buyer. He looked at the amulets and loudly, in front of witnesses, identified the batch. He named the number: 421. He said that this shipment had been written off by the Terrans 3 weeks ago. He said he knew because he himself had once worked in the same scheme. Varden turned pale. People stood around him, merchants of the Third Circle, and among them were 2 of the 4 officials from the Trade Administration that Ira had found. They hadn't ended up in the square by accident. They were waiting. Varden tried to escape. He didn't make it. The Third Circle guards apprehended him an hour later. They found amulets on him, written off the registry, manufactured by the Terran House. A scandal broke out. Not the kind of scandal that lasts a day, the kind that rages through the Third Circle like a fire, consuming everything in its path. Officials from the Trade Administration launched an investigation into the House of Terran. Olt testified. So did the 2 other former buyers that Ira had found. A week later, the Terran House lost its trading license in the Third Circle. Temporarily. For 3 months, but it was like an earthquake. A Fourth Circle house losing its license over petty fraud. The damage to their reputation was 10 times worse than the financial loss. Rena Ilm, the very same middlewoman who had come to Doyon with a partnership proposal. She came again, on the 79th day. She sat down at the table. She looked at Doyon. She was silent for a minute. Then she asked, "Is it you?" Doyon was drinking tea, the very same oolong that Ira had brought as a gift. He looked at Rena. He replied calmly. He said he didn't understand what she was talking about. Rena looked at him. The terminal displayed her emotions. Anger, 61. Respect, 34. Fear, 22. Respect, 34%. She respected him, even while angry. Rena stood up. She said the Terrans would not forget. She left. Doyon finished his tea. He looked at Seta. Seta was sitting with a notebook, staring at him, for a long time. Then she said quietly, "Mr. Shopkeeper, you are a dangerous man." Doyon shook his head. He replied, "Not dangerous, just observant." That evening he sat alone in the shop. Everyone had left. Mina was asleep. Seta was asleep. Ashley was curled up in a ball on her bed with her primer under her pillow. Yuna was sleeping without coughing. Her mother was sleeping peacefully. For the first time in a long while, the house was quiet. Not frightening, but warm. Doyon looked at the terminal. Data on the shop for 2.5 months. Total turnover. over 1,000 marcods. The team. 6 people, including him. Mina, Sarah, Ashley, Yellow, Ira, regular customers. 7. Reputation across 3 circles. Enemies. The Terrines are wounded but alive. Barrick is lying low. And someone else. That observer in the gray jacket. Doyon never found out who sent him. Not the Terrines. The observer appeared before the Terrines noticed. Someone else. Someone from the upper circles. Someone who spotted the anomaly before anyone else. Doyon closed his eyes. The terminal flickered. The dark room smelled of herbs and cooled tea. Behind the wall, his family breathed quietly. He opened his eyes. He looked at the shop sign visible through the window. Hans Herbs and Trinkets. Soon, that name would change. Soon, there would be a trading house here. But first, he had to get through what was. Because Doyon sensed it.
The real storm hadn't even begun yet. On the 80th day, Doyon stood in front of the Second Circle Chamber of Commerce building, holding a document that would change everything. An application to register a trading house. Name, Han and Family. Form of ownership, family trading house with the right to hire employees. Founder, Han Doyon. He had been filling out the paperwork for 3 evenings in a row. Sarah helped him. She checked every line in 3 languages because the Chamber of Commerce accepted documents in the common, commercial, and legal dialects. Registration cost 20 marcods, plus a 50 marcod deposit, plus a monthly fee of 10. A total of 80 marcods in a lump sum. Doyon paid. The clerk behind the counter accepted the documents. He looked at the address. Outer Circle. He raised an eyebrow. Trading houses from the Outer Circle weren't registered. Never. There were rules. A trading house must have premises in the Second Circle or higher. A warehouse, a staff of at least 3 hired employees, a turnover of no less than 100 marcods per month for the last 3 months. Doyon placed a second document on the counter.
A lease agreement for a space on the border of the Second and Third Circles. A small building, a former potter's workshop that went bankrupt last month. 2 rooms, a basement for storage. Rent 15 marcods a month. Doyon found it through Ira. The official looked at the contract, then at the accounting documents. Turnover for the last 3 months. Mina, Sarah, Ashley. 3 employees. Everything in order. Seal, signature. The Han and Family Trading House is registered. Doyon stepped out onto the street with a document in his hand. Sarah was waiting at the entrance. She looked at his face. She understood. She nodded. She said, "Congratulations, Mr. Shopkeeper." Doyon smiled. He said that now she could call him Mr. Head of the Trading House. Sarah snorted. She said that shopkeeper sounded better. They went to the new premises. The building stood on a quiet street 3 blocks from the Blue Line. Stone, not marble, but sturdy. A door made of real oak. Windows with glass, not mica. By Outer Circle standards, it was a palace. By Third Circle standards, it was a dump. For Doyon, it was perfect. The move took a week. The old shop in the Outer Circle didn't close. Mother stayed there. With an assistant, Doyon hired for a marcade a day. His mother didn't want to move. She said that this shop was his father's legacy, and it would stand here as long as the walls stood. Doyon didn't argue. 2 locations were better than 1. The old shop for small-scale retail, the new space for wholesale deals and the team's work. Yellow moved some of the tools to the basement of the new building. Not the forge. The forge remained on the Outer Circle. But now she had a place where she could finish the blades, polishing, engraving, paperwork. Ashley got her own desk, a small one, in the corner. She sat at it as if it were a throne. On the desk lay a primer and a map of the Outer Circle drawn by her own hand, along with a slate for notes.
Sarah took the main desk in the front room. She laid out her notebooks. She began compiling a catalog of goods for the Khan and family trading house, each item with a description, price, and delivery terms, in 3 languages. Mina set up a work area in the back room for preparing herbal mixtures, shelves with herbs, scales, clean tables, jars with labels. Doyon stood in the middle and watched, the people moving around the room, Sarah's table piled high with papers, Ashley, whose lips were moving as she read the primer, at Mina, who was hanging bundles of herbs on hooks made by Yellow, at Yellow, who stood by the door with her arms crossed, watching the street like a sentry. The terminal hung before his eyes. But Doyon wasn't looking at the numbers. He was watching the people. A week after the move, an invitation arrived. A courier in the Third Circle's uniform, an envelope with a seal. Inside, a card, embossed in gold. The Han and Family Trading House is invited to the Third Circle's monthly trade council. A careful voice. No voting rights, but an invitation to the Third Circle. For a trading house that's been around for 2 weeks. Sarah read the invitation. She looked at Doyon. She said it was a trap, or a test, or both. Someone wants to see him up close. Doyon agreed, but he couldn't refuse to go. Declining the invitation is a sign of weakness. Representatives from the 20 largest houses of the Third Circle were present at the Trade Council. A long table, candles, heavy chairs, the smell of wax and old wood. Doyon sat at the end of the table, the youngest, the poorest, the most insignificant. He listened. 2 hours. Discussion of prices, trade quotas, complaints about manufacturers. Boring. Predictable. The terminal recorded the sentiment of each participant. Boredom, formality, habit. But one person in the room was not bored. A man in his 40s. He sat across from Doyon, 5 chairs away. Dark hair, a neat beard, eyes like a hawk's, calm and piercing at the same time. He hadn't spoken a word in 2 hours. He just listened and watched. Doyon, terminal. Sentiment, interest 89, confidence 97, hidden threat 51. 51% hidden threat. Twice as much as Rena Ilm. Doyon memorized the face. After the meeting, he approached the secretary. He asked who was sitting in the 6th seat on the right. The secretary looked at him in surprise. He answered, Vesper Corvain, head of the analytical department of the Seven Seals Guild. Doyon went out onto the street. He stood under a streetlight. He breathed. The Seven Seals Guild. Not the Terran family's house, not a small-time buyer. The Guild. The very one that controls the 7th Circle. The very one that dictates prices across the entire continent. The head of the analytical department, a man who searches for anomalies in the market. And he found an anomaly. Khan's shop. The observer in the gray jacket. It was Vesper's man, not the Terran's. From the very beginning, from the 16th day, Vesper was watching, quietly, patiently, like an analyst gathering data before drawing a conclusion. Doyon stood under a streetlight and thought. The Terrans were a local problem. Vesper Corvain was a problem on an entirely different scale. He came home late. The shop was closed. The lights were on in the new office. Seta was still working. She looked up when he entered, looked at his face, asked what had happened. Doyon sat down, said one name. Vesper didn't have to wait long. On the 89th day, a courier approached the door of the Han and Family Trading House. Not in the Third Circle's uniform, in the Guild's uniform. A silver clasp with 7 seals, an unsealed envelope. Inside, a card with a single line. Dinner. Tomorrow. Liven Restaurant. 8 o'clock in the evening. No signature. Doyon looked at the card. The Liven Restaurant was located in the 4th Circle. a place where people whose monthly spending exceeded the annual turnover of Khan's shop dine. Doyon arrived, alone. Seta wanted to go with him. Doyon refused. He said this wasn't a negotiation, it was an introduction. And introductions are best one-on-one. The restaurant was quiet and expensive. Marble and dark wood and candles in silver candlesticks. Vesper Corvain was sitting at a table by the window. A glass of wine stood before him. He stood up when Doyon approached. He extended his hand. The handshake was firm and dry. They sat down. Vesper ordered dinner for both of them, without asking. Not out of rudeness, but because it was his place, and he knew it was good here. Doyon let him. The terminal ran continuously. Vesper's sentiment. Confidence 96. Interest 84. Respect 27. Hidden threat 44. He hadn't come to destroy. He had come to assess. Vesper spoke first. He said he'd been watching Khan's house for 3 months, that he was impressed, that in 20 years in the guild he hadn't seen such growth from the lower circle, that the fire moss deal was beautiful, that the exposure of the terrines was flawless, and that he wanted to know how. Doyon was eating. The food was the best he'd tasted in this world. Meat in a sauce made from moon mushrooms. Irony. He replied briefly, said he was looking at the data, that all the data is right there on the surface, that you just need to know how to put it together. Vesper shook his head, said that wasn't an answer, said that he himself was the guild's best analyst and hadn't been able to predict the spike in fire moss prices. But a kid from the outer circle predicted it 3 weeks in advance, to the exact day. That isn't just a matter of putting data together. It's something else. Doyon remained silent. Vesper continued. He said he had a proposal, a position in the guild's analytical department, a salary, 200 markades a month, access to data from all 7 circles, resources, protection, status. Everything Doyon could want. The only condition? The Khan and family trading house would come under the guild's control. Doyon put down his fork. He looked at Vesper. The terminal displayed the bluff scale. 0. Vesper wasn't bluffing. He was serious. 200 markades a month. For a guy who had been sleeping on a straw mattress 3 months ago, that was a fortune. And access to data. Data from all 7 circles. The terminal only worked with what Doyon could see and touch. With the guild's data, his capabilities would increase 100-fold. Doyon thought for 20 seconds. Vesper waited, patiently, like a man accustomed to having his offers accepted. Doyon replied, "No." Vesper wasn't surprised, but his eyes narrowed slightly. He asked why. Doyon explained. He said that the trading house wasn't a business. It was people. Mina, who for the first time in her life is doing what she's good at. Seta, who for the first time chose her own life. Yellow, whose craft has finally been recognized. Ashley, who for the first time has a name on a document. Grace. He hadn't hired Grace yet, but he already knew he would. Placing them under the guild's control would mean turning people into resources. And he doesn't do that. Vesper listened. Then he smiled, quietly. He said that Doyon was a romantic, that romantics don't last long in the market. Doyon replied. He said that 3 months ago he had nothing but debt. Now he had a trading house, people, a reputation, and he was alive. And that romantics might not live long, but they live interesting lives. Vesper finished his wine. He stood up. He looked down at Doyon. He said that this was the first refusal in 11 years, and that he would remember it. He left. The bill was paid. Doyon left the restaurant and stepped out onto 4th Circle Street. Night. The streetlights glowed with a magical light. Quiet. beautiful, cold. He knew he had just made himself the most dangerous enemy in Arcadium. Not an enemy in the usual sense. Vesper wouldn't send thugs or forge documents. He would do what he did best. Calculate. Look for weak spots. Apply pressure systematically, economically, intellectually. It would be a war between two analysts, and Vesper had 20 years of experience and the resources of the Guild of the Seven Seals. Doyon had a terminal and 6 people who believed in him. Doyon walked home through the night streets. In his pocket lay the invitation card. He took it out. He flipped it over. On the back, in Vesper's handwriting, was a single word. Too bad. Doyon put the card back. 3 days later, the pressure began. Quiet. Systematic. The Guild didn't hit him over the head. The Guild changed the rules. A new decree from the Chamber of Commerce. Intercircle trade for houses less than 6 months old is limited to 50 markhads per day. Formally, this applied to all new trading houses. In reality, there was only one trading house in the second circle less than 6 months old. Khan and family. 50 markhads a day. Half their current turnover. Doyon gathered the team. He explained. Mina pressed her lips together. Sarah paled, but her back remained straight. Ashley cursed under her breath, using words Yuna didn't know, and it was a good thing Yuna didn't hear them. Yellow remained silent and clenched her fists. Ira arrived in the evening, with information. The order was initiated by the Guild's analytical department. Vesper didn't sign it personally. He used a routine administrative mechanism. No traces. Clean. Doyon nodded. He said he'd expected this, and that he had a plan. The plan was called Grace. Grace Leon Toll sat at a desk in a night office on the 3rd circle, balancing someone else's books. The 3rd one that night. The light from the oil lamp was yellow and dim. Her fingers were stained with ink. Her eyes were red from fatigue. 3 offices, 3 night shifts, 7 days a week. The debts of a husband who had run away 2 years ago, leaving her with a mountain of Iowas and an elderly mother. Doyon found her through Ira. Ira said, "There's a woman, the best bookkeeper I know. Everyone used her, and everyone threw her away. She doesn't trust people, but she does the books flawlessly." Doyon came to see her at 2 in the morning. The office was empty except for her. She looked up. She looked at him. Her eyes were cold, appraising, not hostile, just accustomed to the fact that every new person would bring new pain. Emotionless, no sentiment. Fatigue, 93. Distrust, 88. Hidden hope, 4. 4% hope. Doyon sat down across from her. He didn't introduce himself. He took a folder out of his bag, placed it on the table. He said, "This is the 3-month financial report for the Han and Family Trading House. It was compiled by a non-professional. I know there are errors in it. I need someone who can find them, correct them, and ensure that not a single official from any trade administration in any circle could find fault with a single figure." Grace looked at the folder, then at Doyon. She asked why she needed this.
Doyon replied,
The position. Chief Financial Officer. Salary, 4 markada a day. A share of 8% of the trading house's net profit. Grace didn't move. 4 markada a day. That's more than all 3 night offices combined. 8% of the profit. That. She didn't do the math. She did it later. First, she asked, "Why me?" Doyon answered. He said her qualifications were good enough for a 4th Circle CFO. He said she worked at 3 night offices, not because she couldn't do better, but because they wouldn't give her a chance. He said he would give her the opportunity. Grace looked at him for a long time. 30 seconds. A minute. The terminal showed the distrust gauge slowly dropping. 88. 81. 74. She asked, "The contract." Doyon took a second document out of his bag. The contract, drafted by Sarah, in 3 languages. Every clause is clear. Every condition is transparent. Grace read it, every line, every word. Then she looked up. For the first time during the entire conversation, something other than coldness appeared in her eyes. The distrust on the terminal dropped to 52. She picked up the pen, signed. Doyon took the contract, stood up, stopped at the door, turned around. He said, "Grace, you no longer work for other people. You work for your own share." Grace didn't answer, but her hand holding the pen trembled slightly. Grace started work the next day, and in the first week she changed everything. She found 11 errors in Sarah's records, not critical, but potentially dangerous in an audit. She corrected them. She rebuilt the accounting system from scratch. She implemented double-entry bookkeeping. She separated the expense and income ledgers. She created a reserve fund. 3 marks a day were set aside in case of a crisis. Sarah watched her work with both professional jealousy and professional admiration. Grace calculated 6-figure sums in her head, without mistakes, without pauses. Sarah memorized prices by heart. Grace calculated them faster than Sarah could say them. Together, they were a formidable force. Doyon watched them and thought that in his world, this would be called synergy. But Grace was needed for more than just accounting. She was needed for the plan. The guild's restriction, 50 marks per day for intercircle trade. Doyon couldn't get around it directly, but he could make it meaningless. Grace proposed a scheme, simple and legal. The Han and Family Trading House doesn't sell goods to other circles. It sells licenses, the right to use the Han trademark. Mina's fees were sold under the Han brand, Yellow Blades under the Han brand. A license isn't a commodity, it's a service. Restrictions on intercircle trade do not apply to services. Doyon looked at Grace, then at Seta. Seta raised an eyebrow. She checked the statutes. 3 hours. Confirmed. Licensing trade is not subject to restrictions on goods turnover. Legal, clean, flawless. Within a week, sales had recovered. Greta Solm from the Second Circle purchased a license to sell Mina's potions in her shop. 2 alchemists from the Third Circle bought the right to use the Khan brand to sell certified goods. Each license cost a fixed amount plus a percentage of sales. The money was treated not as merchandise turnover, but as licensing fees. 50 markads a day was the trade limit. Licensing fees were outside the limit. Doyon wasn't breaking the rules. He was playing by different rules. Vesper found out 10 days later.
Doyon knew he would find out because Ira had reported that the man in the gray jacket had reappeared. This time, he wasn't just watching. He went to the trade board and requested the financial reports for the Han and Family House. Grace had prepared the reports in advance. Flawless. Every figure in place. Every transaction legal. Every markad was accounted for. The board official who reviewed the reports called Vesper's secretary and said there was nothing to find fault with. Ira learned of this call through her network. Doyon listened and nodded. He had won the first round. But Vesper wouldn't stop. Vesper hadn't stopped. On the 100th day, Doyon received an invitation. Not to dinner. To the Fifth Circle's private auction. The Tournament of Seals. An annual event. Arcadium's largest auction. 10 days until the tournament. Doyon was preparing. Not for shopping. For war. He knew Vesper would be at the auction. He knew Vesper was planning something. Not a direct blow, but a complex multi-move combination. That's how analysts work. They don't strike. They create conditions under which the opponent strikes themselves.
Doyan assembled a team. He explained,
The Tournament of Seals isn't just an auction. It's a public arena. This is where status is decided. Whoever bids higher is stronger. Whoever wins a lot gets not only the goods, but also reputation. Vesper will try to publicly destroy the Han house. Not physically, financially. Force him to make a bid he can't afford. Or outbid every lot Doyan sets his sights on, to show the entire fifth circle that a kid from the outer can't play with the big boys. Doyan told the team what he needed from each of them. Grace, prepare a full financial report on the house. All assets, all contracts, all reserves. Know every market. Sarah, study the history of the tournaments over the last 5 years. All lots, all prices, all winners. Find patterns. Ira, information on Vesper, his strategy in past tournaments, his weaknesses, his habits. Mina, prepare a special lot, with a sword that exists as a one-of-a-kind piece, of such quality that no fifth circle alchemist could replicate it. It will be our trump card. Yellow, the blade, the best she has ever forged. For display, not for sale, so that people can see the level of mastery behind the House of Han. Ashley, communication. During the auction, she will be outside, between the hall and the outside world. If it goes wrong, she'll need to relay a message faster than anyone in the hall realizes what's happened. 10 days of work. Every evening, Doyan checked in. Grace brought the figures. Total assets of the Han house and the family. 412 marcods, including contracts, inventory, and the reserve fund. Compared the guild's resources, this was peanuts. Vesper could bet hundreds of thousands. Doyan couldn't compete with money, so he had to compete with brains. Sarah brought the analysis. 5 years of tournaments, 3,000 lots, patterns. Vesper never bet on the first 20 lots. He waited, he watched, assessed, and struck at the end, on the last 3 to 4 lots. Always on the most expensive ones. Always won. His strategy was simple. Wear down the opponent with small bets at the start, and then crush them with his budget at the end. Doyan nodded. Classic. In his world, it was called the strategy of attrition, a counter-strategy. Don't play by Vesper's rules. Don't bid on any lots at all. Not a single one. Except for one. The main one. The last one. The one everyone had come for. Ira brought information on the main lot. A license for inter-circle trade with direct access to the 7th circle. 1 per year. Starting price, 100,000 marcads. The usual final price ranges from 150 to 200,000. 412 marcads against 150,000. It wasn't even funny. Doyan couldn't buy this lot with money. But at the Tournament of Seals, bids didn't have to be monetary. The rules allowed non-monetary assets, contracts, obligations, property, votes. Doyan smiled. Votes. 6 months. 6 months since the day he woke up in a stranger's body in a crooked bench. In those 6 months, he'd done a few he hadn't planned. He helped people, not out of strategy, out of principle. He sold Grandma Helen's harvest for a penny. He advised the widow Carnis on how best to store her roots, and her profits doubled. He renewed Gattu's business license, which had expired without him realizing it. He told 3 shopkeepers from the outer circle about the price spike on fire moss, and they managed to stock up. He helped 5 others renegotiate their lease terms, which had been extortionate. He told 12 people where to buy things cheaper. Through Mina, he distributed cough medicine to those who couldn't pay. Through Ashley, he warned shopkeepers about guard inspections. Over 6 months, he quietly, without fanfare or publicity, helped 312 people in the outer circle. Not for money, just because he could. And every one of them remembered. Doyan spent the last 5 days before the tournament not in the shop, on the streets.
He went from door to door. He talked, explaining, not asking, explaining, telling them that the Guild of the Seven Seals wanted to crush his trading house, that if the guild won, prices in the outer circle would rise even more, that shopkeepers would lose even more, that the open index, he said that name out loud for the first time, a public system of fair prices for every merchant, available for free, so that no one could cheat on the price, so that no father would die because medicine cost 10 times more than it should. People listened. Some shook their heads. Some were silent. Some nodded. And some pulled papers out of their desk drawers. IOUs, trade contracts, their signatures, their names on the documents, and they gave them to Do-yeon. They didn't sell them. They gave them away. Because 6 months ago, he had taken a copper coin from Grandma Helen for medicine that cost 4 silver coins. And they remembered. 312 receipts. 312 names. 312 shopkeepers from the outer circle who said the same thing. We're with you. Do-yeon gathered the receipts into a folder. Heavy. Thick. Every sheet is a person. Every person is a voice. And every voice at the Tournament of Seals was worth as much as 1,000 markades, because the auction rules stated, a bid can be any asset that has value to the market. And 312 suppliers united in a network is an asset. It is a trading block. It is a market force that cannot be bought with money. Because money is paper, and people are people. A winter night. Snow. The first snow of the year. Do-yeon stood in front of the 5th Circle building where the Tournament of Seals was taking place. White columns, golden doors, guards in full dress uniform, torches burned brightly. Snowflakes melted in the warm air. Behind him stood the team. Mina, quiet and focused. Sarah, back straight, chin up. Eyes calm. Yellow. Arms crossed over her chest, shoulders squared. If anyone tried to touch Do-yeon, she would break both their arms. And that's not a metaphor. Ashley, standing slightly to the side, nervous, biting her lip, but she was there. Grace, a cold expression, a folder of documents under her arm, ready for any number. Ira, a soft smile, hands in her pockets, the calmest of them all, because she knew everything there was to know. Do-yeon looked at them, at the 6 people he had met over the past 6 months. None of them had come to him for money. None of them had stayed for profit. Each stood there because he had seen something in her that no one else had. He nodded. They entered. The hall of the Tournament of Seals was enormous. The ceiling was lost in the dim light. Black marble columns, candles in crystal chandeliers, armchairs upholstered in velvet, the scent of expensive wood and old money. 200 people, heads of trading houses, guild representatives, bankers, appraisers, people whose wealth was measured not in marks, but in influence. Do-yeon sat in the back row. Next to him, Grace with a folder, Sarah with a notebook. The rest outside the hall. According to the rules, only the head of the house and 2 advisors were allowed in the hall. Mina and Yellow waited in the foyer. Ira in the tea room across from the bed. Ashley was on the street. Communication. Vesper sat in the 3rd row, the center seat. He didn't turn around, but Do-yeon knew that Vesper knew he was there. The auction began. The first lots, small ones, batches of goods, supply contracts, local trade licenses. Vesper didn't bid. Do-yeon didn't bid. 20 lots went by in 2 hours. Do-yeon sat and counted. The terminal analyzed every lot. It showed the fair price. It showed who was overpaying and who was getting a good deal. Doyon kept track in his head, not for himself, for the future, for the open index. Every price, every transaction. Data. On the 21st lot, Vesper made his first bid, a batch of rare stones from the southern mines. Starting price, $12,000. Vesper bid 14. Outbid. 16. Vesper. 18. Silence. The lot went to Vesper. Doyon didn't move. The lots kept coming. 25. 30. 35. Vesper took 2 more, calmly every time, without emotion, professionally. On the 38th lot, the auctioneer announced the final lot of the evening, the main one. A license for inter-circle trade with direct access to the 7th circle. Starting price, 100,000 markads. The hall came alive. This was why everyone had come. This was what Vesper had been waiting for all evening. Doyon rose from his seat in the back row and walked forward, to the bidding podium. 200 pairs of eyes followed him. A boy from the outer circle was going to bid on a lot worth 100,000 markads. A murmur rippled through the hall. Vesper turned around. For the first time that evening, he looked at Doyon. His face was inscrutable, but the terminal showed. Interest, 96. Surprise, 31. Excitement, 12. Excitement. For the first time that evening, Vesper felt excitement. He had been waiting for this. The auctioneer asked for opening bids. Sarin Trading House, 110,000. House Walter, 120. The Seven Seals Guild, 150. Vesper's voice, calm, steady. The room fell silent. 150? That was more than usual. Vesper bid aggressively. He pressed from the very beginning. He showed he was ready to pay any price. The Sarin House dropped out of the bidding. The Walter House raised it to 160. Vesper. 180. Walter. 200. Vesper. 220. Walter fell silent, dropped out. 220,000 markads. Vesper alone. The auctioneer asked if there were any other bids. Silence. 220,000. Doyon had 412 markads in assets. Not even thousands, just markads. He raised his hand. The auctioneer looked at him. The room looked at him. Vesper looked at him. Doyon walked up to the auctioneer's page. He opened a folder. He placed 312 promissory notes on the table, each with a name, with a signature, with the shop's seal. 312 small shopkeepers from the outer circle. 312 suppliers. 312 votes. He spoke up. He said his bid was not monetary. He said that according to the tournament rules, a bid could be any asset with market value. He said that before the auctioneer lay 312 contracts with shopkeepers of the outer circle.
Each contract represented a supplier tied to the Khan and family trading house. Together, they constitute a trading block covering 60% of the outer circle's retail trade. Any trading house that acquires this block controls the supply of the market's first tier. This isn't 400 markets. This is infrastructure. The hall was silent. The auctioneer looked at the receipts. Vesper turned fully toward Doyon. For the first time. His face. Doyon had seen it through the terminal. Interest. 100, the maximum on the scale. Vesper realized what was happening. The kid from the outer circle hadn't come to buy a license. He'd come to change the auction rules, to pit people against money. Vesper stood up. He spoke. His voice was steady, but Doyon could hear the tension in it. He said that the bid had no fixed market value, that the receipts from small shopkeepers were not assets but paper, that they could not be converted into markads, that the auction operated with numbers, not promises. Doyon replied calmly. He said, "Mr. Corvain, I don't trade for money. I trade for people. I have 312 of them. How many do you have?" Silence. Long. Heavy.
A silence in which 200 people tried to understand what had just happened. Vesper opened his mouth to reply. And then, from the back rows of the hall, Ira Vossen stood up. She entered quietly, uninvited. Security didn't stop her because Ira Vossen was known in every circle of the Arcadium. She walked to the auctioneer's table, quietly, calmly, with a soft smile that meant nothing and meant everything. She placed a receipt on the table, her own. She said, "Mr. Khan has 313. Grace rose from the table with the documents. Silently, she approached. She placed her receipt, 314. Mina entered from the foyer. She wasn't supposed to be in the hall. Security stepped toward her. Yellow followed her in. Security looked at Yellow and stepped back. Mina placed her receipt, 315. Yellow placed hers, 316. Sarah stood next to Doyon, chin up, back straight. She placed her receipt, 317. And Ashley was the last to run in, covered in snow, out of breath. She squeezed past the security guard, who didn't even have time to react. She ran up to the table. She placed her receipt, signed crookedly,
with a spelling mistake in her own name. 318. The hall was silent. In the fifth circle hall, where nothing but dry numbers had ever been heard, 6 names of ordinary people were spoken. The auctioneer looked at the receipts, then at Doyon, then at Vesper. Vesper stood motionless, his face. The terminal showed sentiment, and Doyon saw what he hadn't expected. Anger, 0. Disappointment, 0. Respect, 67%. And else. Something the terminal had labeled with a word Doyon hadn't seen on the scale before. Recognition. Vesper looked at the 6 women standing next to the boy from the outer circle. At the herbalist with weather-beaten hands. At the noblewoman with a straight back. At the half-blood blacksmith whose shoulders were broader than any man in the hall. At the former thief with a dirty face and a crookedly signed receipt. At the accountant who, 3 months ago, had been working at 3 nighttime offices. At the informant who, for the first time in her life, had openly taken someone's side. Vesper lowered his hand, slowly. He didn't raise the bid. He didn't say a word. He just sat down. The auctioneer waited a minute. He announced, the lot was closed. The license for inter-circle trade with direct access to the 7th circle was awarded to the Khan and family trading house. The room erupted in whispers. Doyon stood at the table. The receipts lay before him. 318 sheets of paper. 318 names. He turned to the team, to the 6 women standing nearby watching him. Mina, with trembling lips and wet eyes. Seta, with an impassive face but hands that were shaking. Yellow was silent, her fists clenched, her eyes red. Ashley, sniffling and wiping her face with her sleeve. Grace, standing straight and quiet, with something in her eyes that hadn't been there 3 months ago. Vera. Ira, who was smiling. For the first time, a genuine smile, not a professional one. Doyon nodded. He said nothing. Words were unnecessary. They left the 5th circle building and stepped out onto the street. It was snowing. The first real snow of this winter. Large, soft flakes. The street lights glowed with a warm light. The street was empty, white, and quiet. Ashley turned her face toward the snow. She closed her eyes. She opened her mouth. She caught snowflakes with her tongue. She was 19, and for the first time in her life, standing on the 5th circle. Yellow stood next to her and silently placed a hand on her shoulder. Mina walked slightly ahead, carrying a bundle of dried herbs she'd brought along for some reason. A habit. Sera walked beside Doyun. She was silent. Then she said quietly, "Mr. Shopkeeper, you did it." Doyun shook his head. "You said it. We did it, Miss Trilingual." Sera looked at him. For the first time in 6 months, she didn't straighten her back or lift her chin. She just smiled, quietly, like a person who had finally arrived where they were going. They walked through the night city. Snow fell on their shoulders. Grace walked slightly behind and was counting something in her head, a habit she would never lose. Ira walked beside her and said nothing. 2 women who had been alone their whole lives, walking side by side, in silence. And for the first time, the silence wasn't empty. Doyun walked and thought. About the 7th Circle's license. About the open index, which could now truly be launched. About Vesper, who hadn't become an enemy, but something else. An adversary worthy of respect. About the terrains who would return. About the other fragments of the Black Index waiting somewhere in the world. About the grandfather he didn't know, who had chosen him across worlds and through death. About the years of work and struggle and growth ahead. And about the present, right now, at this very moment. Snow and silence, and 6 people by his side. That was enough. They got home around midnight. His mother was waiting, with hot soup. Yuna was sitting at the table drawing with charcoal. She wasn't coughing. For the first time in 6 months. The last treatment session had been a week ago. The healer, Orman Grace, had said, full recovery. Yuna was drawing a cat. Better than last time. She looked up when the door opened. She saw everyone. She smiled, a wide one. The kind of smile children have who don't know the world can be cruel. Or who know, but smile anyway. The mother looked at her son, at his face, at the snow in his hair, at the people behind him. She asked, as usual, how did it go? Doyun took off his jacket, sat down at the table, picked up a spoon, tasted the soup. Hot, thick, with meat. Not barley porridge without salt. Real soup. He looked at his mother. He answered. Fine. Everything's fine. His mother nodded. She didn't ask for details. She never asked. She just made soup and waited. That was work, too. The most important kind. 9 people sat at the table. Mother, Yuna, Mina, Sera, Yellow, Ashley, Grace, Ira, and Doyun. A small room. Crowded. Noisy. Ashley was telling Yuna about the 5th Circle. Yuna listened with her mouth open. Mina was pouring tea. Sera was arguing with Grace about some calculation. Yellow ate silently and a lot. Ira sat in the corner, smiling and drinking tea. Mother looked at everyone and shook her head. But she was smiling. Doyun sat eating soup and watching the people at the table. The terminal hung before his eyes. It displayed numbers. The cost of the food on the table. The depreciation of the furniture. The consumption of firewood for heating. Doyun blinked. The terminal minimized. It vanished. A dark screen. For the first time in 6 months, Doyun looked at the world without numbers. Just with his eyes. And he saw what the terminal couldn't show. 9 people at one table. Hot soup. Snow outside the window. Yuna's laughter. His mother's hands on a teacup. A warm, cozy, noisy room that 6 months ago had been empty
cold and quiet. He quietly uttered a word, in a language no one here knew. One word. Chip. Home.
Mina turned around. She asked what he had said.
Doyon shook his head.
He said, "Nothing, just thinking out loud." He finished his soup. He set down the bowl. Snow was falling outside the window. The shop stood in its place. The sign was visible through the snowy haze. Khan's Herbs and Trinkets. Soon they'd hang a second sign nearby. The Khan and Family Trading House. And then a third. The Open Index. But that would be tomorrow. Today there was soup and snow and the people he'd found. That was enough.